Hello, and thank you for choosing this full length, clean, historical Western romance by Kat Lynn. We are so happy to have you with us today. Before we begin, don't forget to tap the subscribe button and like and share with your friends. Your support allows us to continue sharing these sweet, heartwarming stories for free. Now, relax and get ready to travel back in time to the American frontier, where we join an adventure to find love and happily ever after. Enjoy. Copyright of Kat Lynn. A Perfect Solution, Rainbow Falls Brides, Book 6, Chapter 1, Crack. Ursula gasped. Another button broke. Glancing around to make sure no one else had noticed, she let out a sigh when she realized everyone else in the section was concentrating on their buttons. With haste, she shoved the broken button into the pocket of her apron. If a supervisor saw the button and the report made its way to the grumpy owner, Ben Harland, she might go home with half wages for the week. That was if she was lucky. A dozen wooden buttons cost 2 cents, but Harland was fiercely against wasting materials. Thankfully, her section's supervisor wasn't nearby. After rubbing sweat off her forehead with her left arm, she returned to work using a manual grinding machine to smooth and polish buttons. The whirl of machinery droned on around her, and the air around the button factory was heavy and almost suffocating. Ursula's fingers moved deftly. More sweat beaded on her forehead, and some dropped from her brows, but she kept her focus. Her thoughts wandered to her ailing mother. Even though she was trying to put on a brave face and carry on like she was fine, it was clear she wasn't. Her cough had worsened, and the few dollars a week from the factory were barely enough to buy medicine, let alone food. Even with her twin sister working in the same factory, things still looked bleak. As the afternoon sun slanted through the grimy factory windows, Ursula, the elder of the twins by mere minutes, glanced at her sister Amelia, who was working a few feet away. They were a mirror image of each other. Both sisters had brown hair, although Ursula's was a darker shade. Amelia's eyes were a striking blue, like the color of the ocean around the city, in contrast to Ursula's hazel eyes. Her mother always told her she got her eyes from her father. Well, she never met him. He was a sailor who died in a shipwreck at sea before she was even born. Ursula blinked. She'd stopped working. Shaking her head, she returned to work. That was when she noticed she was the only one still polishing buttons. Others around her had stopped. Some were lying back, and a few munched on hard bread and homemade cookies. It was break time. 30 minutes. Once every day. That was all they got. Suddenly, a hand shook her shoulder. She turned, nearly jerking back. It was Amelia. "Come with me," Amelia whispered, her brows furrowed. "Is there something wrong?" "Just come." Ursula swallowed, a pit growing in her stomach. A trace of dread gnawed at her as she followed Amelia to a shadowed corner of the factory. They moved quietly, weaving between the rows of machines and crouched workers, until they reached a spot where they could overhear a conversation between two workers. A woman was speaking when they stood still behind a cold metal wall to listen. "I bet that ain't the only thing on your mind. Your wife giving you trouble ain't enough to get you in a lather. Anything else on your mind?" The man sighed. "That's why I called you here. I heard the factory's closing down." "Why?" The woman's question rang out louder than expected. "Shh, quiet down, will ya? Look, I heard from a friend of mine who works in a saloon downtown that Mr. Harlan's in deep trouble with his gambling debts. Ain't no surprise." The woman's voice trembled slightly. "What's that mean for us?" "Means we'll be out of jobs, Mabel. And with times as hard as they are, finding new work ain't gonna be easy." Ursula felt her stomach drop. The factory was their lifeline, thin as it was. She glanced at Amelia, who looked just as stricken. Her face sank. She beckoned at Ursula, and they retreated as quietly as they came. The steel walls of the factory seemed more oppressive now, and the air was thicker. "What should we do, Ursula?" Amelia's voice quivered, barely audible over the din. "If that man was right, then we'll lose our work here." Ursula shook her head, her mind racing. She tried to think, but couldn't find any answers. Others around them resumed working. "I don't know," she said with a deep sigh. "For now, let's get to work. Break's over. We'll think of something after." Amelia nodded and returned to her station. Ursula continued where she left off, but her fingers trembled as she polished the buttons. Her mind raced and her heart hammered in her chest. She searched for options but couldn't find any. The button factory was all she and her sister knew. Before they found the jobs, they helped her mother with her small laundry business. It was miserable living, and they barely made $3 a week. With their jobs at the factory, they made 5. She, 3, and Amelia, 2. It wasn't comfortable living, but they were surviving at least. What would happen now? Their mother couldn't work anymore. Would they return to trying to eke out a miserable living washing clothes? The rest of the day passed in a blur. When the final whistle blew, signaling the end of their shift, Ursula and Amelia joined the throng of workers heading for the door. Ursula sighed. It was a wonder she didn't break any more buttons. Outside, the air was cool. Ursula relished the coolness on her skin, as it made her forget the stifling heat of the factory. Or at least, she tried to. It did little to soothe her troubled mind. With Amelia beside her, Ursula trudged down the narrow, crowded streets of the Lower East Side. She glanced around, hoping something would distract her from the dread within. It was all the same. She wished she could escape this: the cobblestones, slick with grime, the pungent mix of smoke, refuse, and the faint stench of sulfur wafting around. The brick facades of the building around her, blackened with soot. Each building leaned over the street, its windows covered with makeshift curtains and laundry strung out to dry, flapping in the breeze. Narrow alleys between the buildings were choked with rubbish. Even at dusk, the streets were alive. Peddlers shouted their wares, and children darted between the adults, their faces smeared with dirt. Many of the adults' faces were either pulled together or lined with wrinkles. As usual, there was a cacophony of different languages: Italian, Yiddish, and German, and something unintelligible. Ursula grimaced. As they approached an old 3-story tenement, Ursula's thoughts turned to their mother, all alone in their cramped apartment. Had she had dinner? Yesterday, Ursula bought some potatoes. She hoped her mother had prepared herself a meal. A sinking feeling gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. She pushed open the front door. The stairwell was dimly lit and smelled damp. The worn wooden steps creaked under her and Amelia's weight. Reaching their floor, Ursula paused at the door. With her hand on the worn handle, she took a deep breath. "We can't tell Ma," she said, turning to Amelia. "It'll only worry her more." Amelia nodded, although her face was pale and drawn. "But what if we can't find new jobs, Ursula? What if—" Amelia's words faded out. Ursula grimaced. She didn't need to say it. "We'll figure something out. We have to." As she opened the door, she stopped. Her pulse raced. "What's wrong? You?" Amelia paused as well. The space was dark, lit only by the fading light from a single window. That was unusual. By now, their mother should have lit a lamp and prepared a meal. It was then that the faint sound came to her. She leaned closer. The labored breathing became more audible. Her eyes widened as she caught a figure lying in the corner. Feeling her way around, she found a lantern. She lit it in a hurry and turned as soon as the wick was burning. Then she gasped. A muffled scream escaped Amelia. Their mother was worse. She was lying on a thin mattress in the corner, coughing. Her skin was pale, and her skin was covered in drops of sweat, which soaked her clothes. Her eyes fluttered open, dim and tired. Ursula rushed over and crouched. "How was work, dears?" their mother asked, summoning a shaky smile. "What happened, Ma?" Their mother tried to sit up, but failed. Amelia rushed over as well. Ursula turned to her. Tears cascaded from her eyes. Ursula bit her lip, her eyes returning to her mother. It was clear. Their mother was suffering from consumption. Why had she kept it from them and tried to put on a brave face? "I'm fine, my dears. It's just a little cold. I'll be back on my feet in no time. Don't you go worrying about me." That was impossible. Ursula's gaze watered. But she tried her best to smile. She brushed a stray lock of hair from her mother's forehead. Her eyes caught a dirty napkin near her mother. There was a deep crimson stain on it. She gnashed her teeth. Her mother was lying. "If they didn't get help—" "We won't, Ma. You just rest. We'll cook you dinner now." Their mother smiled. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, she began coughing again. It rocked her body, and Ursula moved to rub her chest. Blood splashed onto Ursula's hands just as her mother calmed. Their mother was dying, and she couldn't afford help. She turned to Amelia, who covered her lips with her hands as more tears streamed from their faces. Their mother drifted to sleep. Standing, she stepped aside. She pressed a hand against her chest, finally letting her tears flow. The weight was too much to bear. On one hand, the factory was closing. The closure would mean they would lose their work and, with it, their ability to sustain the family. On the other hand, her mother was dying. What could she do? Ursula took a moment to catch her breath, throwing her head back and exhaling. The heavy scent of lye soap filled her nostrils. Washing a lot of clothes was hard work. She began to wonder if things would have been different if Harlan's button factory had stayed open. There was a good chance they would, but she couldn't dwell on it. There was work to be done. Taking another deep breath, she returned to scrubbing coarse fabric against a washboard. Her hands were red and raw from the cold, soapy water. They hurt, but she had no choice. The sun cast a weak light through the grimy window of the tiny apartment, barely warming the room. Ursula glanced at a small heap of clothes in a corner. Soon, Amelia would be back with more clothes. She had to hurry. It had been a month since their mother passed, and the factory had closed soon after. Ursula and Amelia had taken up their mother's old job of doing laundry to make ends meet, but it was barely enough to keep them from starving. Washing clothes for people almost as poor as them wouldn't take them anywhere. On days they were lucky, they got up to $1, a few cents per cloth. Those days were few and far between. Most people could only afford a cent per cloth. If the twins didn't take that, there were a lot of others who would. They had no choice. She sighed as she dunked a shirt back into the wash basin. Her belly rumbled, growing louder before finally ceasing. In its place, a dull, lingering pain followed. She couldn't remember if she had eaten dinner last night. Probably not, she thought. She was too tired to think. There hadn't been much to eat anyway. She decided to wait until tonight, hoping to find something to fill her belly then. Maybe they'd get enough today. She wrung out the shirt and hung it on the line strung across the room, beads of water dripping onto the floor. This was back-breaking work. Ursula stretched, then leaned against the wall. She stared at her hands. They were chapped and sore. There was work to be done. As Ursula returned to scrubbing, the door creaked open. Amelia burst into the room, beaming. In her hand, she clutched a small, tattered newspaper. There were no clothes. Ursula's heart sank, and her face dropped. What happened? Couldn't you get any clothes? They'd all been taken. But here, look what I found, Amelia exclaimed, holding up the paper. Ursula's irritation boiled over, and a deep frown colored her face. Unless Amelia was suggesting they begin eating paper, they needed clothes. And what do you suggest we do with an old newspaper? Boil it? Amelia was unfazed, her smile remaining. It's not just any newspaper. It's the Matrimonial Times. I heard some women talking about it. They said it could help us. I couldn't ask them more about it, but I decided to find a copy myself. Jerry gave me one. He's such a kind man. Ursula stopped scrubbing and sat up. She raised a brow, wiping her hands on her apron. Amelia had always been reserved, so Ursula understood she couldn't walk up to two strangers to ask. But what was this about the Matrimonial Times? Jerry, the old newspaper vendor, was indeed kind for the act, but for what use? The Matrimonial Times. What on earth are you talking about? Amelia handed her the paper. It's a newspaper with a section full of advertisements from men looking for wives out west. It might just be our ticket out of here. Ursula's frown melted away. Her gaze narrowed as she unfolded the paper and scanned the adverts. Amelia leaned in over her shoulder. Most of the advertisements were from men seeking women to help them build a life on the frontier. The idea seemed far-fetched, but the thought of escaping their current life didn't seem very bad. Amelia pointed to a particular advertisement, her eyes widening. Look at this one, Ursula, and this one. They're both from a place called Rainbow Falls. If we both go there, we could stay together. Ursula read the ads carefully. Both were from ranchers in a place called Rainbow Falls. The first was from a man named Thomas Pearson. Amelia read aloud. Wanted, a bride. I'm Thomas Pearson, a rancher of 25 from Rainbow Falls, seeking a woman who's capable of being my wife and building a family for me. I own a thriving piece of land with cattle and horses, and I'm a man of honest means. What I want is a kind and accommodating woman who's also resilient and ready to embrace life here. If you're a woman of good character, please write to Thomas Pearson. Pearson Ranch, Rainbow Falls. I'll be waiting." "Wow," Ursula whistled. Amelia caught her breath. "That's a fine proposal, if I do say so myself. I've never even met this man, and I already like him." Ursula smiled at her sister. "Then go for him. The newspaper is dated just last week, so there's still a chance no one has written to him yet." "You really think I could?" "It's worth a try," Ursula said, nodding. Amelia grinned, then pointed to the paper. "Let's check out the next one." This time, it was Ursula who read. Unlike Thomas's advertisement, this was short. "Rancher, 26, from Rainbow Falls, seeking a hard-working woman to share and manage a ranch. Must be able to raise a family. Offering a stable partnership. Write to Ethan Garrett, Silver Creek Ranch, Rainbow Falls." Ursula's heart pounded as she considered the option. Could this be their way out? Leaving New York for a fresh start in a place called Rainbow Falls seemed almost too good to be true. But the thought of a new life away from their miserable existence here had taken root in her mind. "We should write to them," Amelia urged, as if reading her mind. "We don't have much to lose, and if it works out, we could have a new life out west." Ursula nodded slowly. She set the newspaper aside and took a deep breath. She didn't know if this could work, but another glance at Amelia, and Ursula knew she had to try. "All right, let's do it. We'll write to both of them and see what happens. For now, let's finish up the laundry." Amelia embraced Ursula, whose face lit up with a smile. Chapter 2. Ethan leaned back in his chair, tipping his hat to shield his eyes from the harsh midday sun that filtered through the open barn doors. He studied the man standing before him, a tall, wiry figure with a fox-like face lined with a black beard, his calloused hands fiddled with a hat. The man had a perpetual smile on his face that twitched. He looked like he would tip over if Ethan lunged at him. He didn't seem to be the type to oversee a growing ranch. If there was one thing Ethan learned growing up, it was to never trust appearances. He unclenched his clenching fists. "You're here for the job, aren't you?" "Name's Wyatt," the ranch hand said in a low, steady drawl. "Been working ranches since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. I know my way round cattle, horses, and just about anything with 4 legs." Ethan nodded. "You've been back in these parts for how long?" 4 years. "Give or take," Wyatt replied, rubbing his hair. "Came from Texas. In that time, I've seen what you've done here in just 3 months. New hires, new buildings going up, and a herd that's grown considerably. It looks like you're aiming high." Ethan grinned. This man was attentive. He'd give him that. He didn't work on the ranch, yet he noticed. Ethan liked someone like that who could pay attention to detail. True to word, it had been just 3 months since Ethan had returned from prospecting gold in Oregon and striking it rich, to rebuilding his father's abandoned ranch. He was only beginning. "I am, but it's been a lot of work. It's hard to keep up, you know. I need someone who can take on the day-to-day, keeping things running smoothly on the field." Wyatt's eyes glinted. "I've handled worse. Ran a spread twice this size down in Texas. Kept it running like clockwork until my boss got into trouble with outlaws, and I had to hightail it out. I can do the same here." Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Tell me more about that. What kind of changes did you bring about down there?" Wyatt rubbed his chin, pausing for a moment. "For starters, reorganized the work schedule. I had the hands working smarter, not harder. That improved the grazing rotations, kept the cattle healthy, and kept the land from being overgrazed. I also advised my boss to upgrade the infrastructure. He even got a bunkhouse set up." Ethan's eyes narrowed. Wyatt was on to something. "And what about discipline? How'd you handle the men?" Wyatt shrugged. "Firm but fair. Respect is a two-way street. You treat a man right, he'll give you his best. But if someone steps out of line, well, they learn quick not to do it again." There was no need for more. This was what he was looking for. Standing up, he extended his hand. "All right, Wyatt. You're hired, starting today." Wyatt grasped Ethan's hand with a firm shake. His hat dropped, but he made no move to pick it up. His smile widened. "Thank you, sir. You can call me Ethan. I have a feeling we'll get along well." "I'm afraid I can't do that, sir. You ain't even tested me yet. I might be all words. I'd like to call you that when I've earned it." Ethan nodded. "At least call me Mr. Garrett." "Will do, Mr. Garrett. I won't let you down." Ethan clapped him on the shoulder. "I trust you won't. Now, I've got to head into town. You take the lead here. First, get yourself settled." Leaving Wyatt to familiarize himself with the ranch, Ethan made his way to the stables. The scent of hay and the neighing of horses greeted him as he approached his steed, a sturdy bay mare named Chestnut. She was a beauty, but he needed a real stallion. He glanced around at the mostly empty stalls, but for 2 horses, he needed more horses. He patted her neck affectionately before saddling her up, the leather creaking as he tightened the girth. He led Chestnut out into the open, pausing for a moment to take in the sight of his ranch. The newly built farmhouse stood tall amid the skeletons of structures. There was still a lot to do. The cattle and goats grazed in the fields, and the ranch hands bustled about with their tasks. 3 months of relentless effort had transformed this barren old patch of land into something with potential. Still, there was work to be done. Mounting Chestnut, he settled into the saddle with ease. With a gentle nudge, he urged Chestnut into a steady gallop toward town. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the path. The dusty trail stretched out into a rocky road, and the horses' hooves clopped against the packed earth. Ethan let his mind wander. There was still the matter of the stream. Ethan's grip tightened until his knuckles were white. No matter what, he couldn't let that fall into anyone else's hands. He needed that water. Reaching the outskirts of town, Ethan slowed Chestnut to a walk, guiding her toward the livestock market. The market was bustling as always as Ethan entered, and he spotted the usual sight of ranchers and traders haggling over prices, inspecting animals, and exchanging news. Ethan dismounted, tying Chestnut to a post before making his way through the throng. His eyes scanned the horses on offer in the corrals. He needed several good mounts. He didn't mind if he got them gradually. One thing was for sure. He wasn't willing to settle for anything less than the best. As he approached a group of well-muscled mustangs, a familiar voice called out, "Well, if it ain't Ethan Garrett." Ethan turned to the owner of the warm voice behind him. He recognized the clear blue eyes and jet-black hair poking under a Stetson hat and smiled. Duke Warren was an old acquaintance known for his expertise with horses. "Duke," Ethan said with a nod. "Been a while." "Too long," Duke replied, clapping Ethan on the back. "I heard you've been busy out there on your spread. You got yourself quite the operation going. You must have struck gold or something." If only Duke knew how close to the truth he was. Ethan chuckled, shrugging. "Something like that. For me, it was just a lot of hard work and a bit of luck." "Well, you've done more in 3 months than most folks do in a lifetime since you came back. Give yourself credit for that." "Isn't that too generous?" "I'm being serious. Word is, with the way you're growing, you'll be rubbing elbows with the big ranches in no time. I might say you're almost there. Ranches like the Sorensen Ranch and Pearson Ranch." The mention of Thomas Pearson's name sent a blaze surging through Ethan's nerves, causing his muscles to tense. Grinding his jaws and sucking some air between his teeth, he clenched his fists. He tried to keep his smile, but it faded. Duke stopped speaking. "Is this about Pearson?" "I didn't mean to bring him up," Duke said quickly. "No harm done." Ethan forced a smile, though the bitterness lingered. The feud between his family, the Garretts, and the Pearsons ran deep. Just thinking about it brought a bad taste to Ethan's mouth. He swore inside that the Garretts wouldn't be cheated twice. Clearing his throat, Duke shifted the conversation back to the horses. "So, what are you looking for today?" "Need a few good mounts," Ethan said, casting Thomas from his mind. "Strong, reliable. I have a lot of work to do back at the ranch." Duke nodded, pointing out a few prime mustangs. "These here are solid, good bloodlines, strong backs. They're costly but worth it." Ethan was about to reply when a faint voice echoed from far behind. The voice was familiar enough to prickle his senses. He turned and froze, his eyes locked on a tall man with flowing locks of silky dark hair, talking to a salesman. The man turned, and his silvery eyes, like 2 moons, locked gazes with Ethan. Ethan's brows furrowed, and his fists tightened so hard they began to ache. He grew stiff. Thomas Pearson, in the flesh. Thomas's eyes narrowed as he took in the sight of Ethan, and the smile on his lips faded as his mouth set in a thin line. Without a word, he turned on his heel, marching back to his carriage. No words were said, but the silence spoke volumes. The conversation around them had ceased, and only the nickers and whinnies of horses around them broke the silence. Then, slowly, conversation filled the void. Ethan faced the horses, but his nerves were still taut. "It looks like Pearson ain't too happy to see you," Duke said, albeit dryly. "No surprise there. Your feud over that stream has been the talk of the town." Ethan turned. "You know about that?" Duke shook his head. "Everyone knows about that. You two aren't keeping it subtle. What happened to your father was a shame, cheating a man out of his rightful claim." Ethan's eyes darkened. "The Garretts won't be cheated twice, Duke. Not on my watch." "So, what's next on your agenda? It looks like you're already doing all you can on that ranch of yours." "There's no agenda. I'm just here to build my ranch and a family. If anyone has a problem with that, they can contend with me." Ethan's expression softened as he turned to Duke. "I've placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride. Since I'm making progress with the ranch, it's time to start a family." Duke's gaze grew distant. "Ah, I remember when I met my darling Hope through that. That's a mighty step, Ethan. It's great if it works out, but there are risks. Are you sure you're ready for it?" Ethan nodded. "It's time. I need someone by my side. Building up the ranch is just the beginning. I think I'm ready." "Well, that's something you don't hear every day. You've got yourself a plan, that's for sure. I hope you find the right lady." "Me too," Ethan said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Now, about those horses." Chapter 3. We're here. Ursula and Amelia glanced out the window. Ursula's chest fluttered as the wooden platform came into view. The train's wheels screeched to a halt, followed by the hissing of steam. Ursula and Amelia stood at the edge of their seats, glancing at each other as they gripped the old, weathered trunks that held everything they owned. As the train doors opened, they stepped onto the platform. Ursula shielded her eyes from the blazing rays above. It was hot. She squinted her eyes. Even with the burning heat, there was something about this place. Ursula took a deep breath. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and wildflowers along with the faint odor of steam from the train. She was so used to the industrial stench of New York that she'd never inhaled air this fresh. "Can you believe it, Ursula?" Amelia said, her eyes glimmering. "We're here. We're really in Rainbow Falls." Ursula glanced around. "It feels like a dream, doesn't it?" They moved to a quieter spot on the platform, setting their trunks down and taking a moment to take in their surroundings. "I can't wait to meet Thomas. Do you think he'll be as handsome as he was in his photograph?" Ursula laughed softly as she turned to Amelia, who had a dreamy look in her eyes. I'm sure he will be. And Ethan, too. They sound like good men. They've both written such kind, thoughtful letters. I'm so excited for our weddings, Ursula. And just imagine having babies at the same time. Our children will grow up together, just like we did. We'll all have lunch on Sundays after church. Ursula held her sister's hands, beaming. That'll be wonderful. It's a fresh start. They fell into a comfortable silence. Ursula's mind drifted back to New York and the small, cluttered apartment they had shared with their mother. Living in the city was hard, but it was home. Now they were far away on the other side of the country. Do you think we're ready for this? Ursula asked quietly. Life out here in the West is so different from what we're used to. Amelia looked at her sister with a warm smile. We've always been strong. We've faced so much together and we've always come out stronger. We'll face our new lives the same way we've faced everything else, together. Ursula breathed relief. She didn't have to worry. Her sister was right with her. She would always be. You're right. I just hope Ethan and Thomas are everything we've dreamed of. They will be. What do you think they'll be like in person? Will they recognize us right away? We sent them the only photographs we had. Let's hope they do. They could only hope. The photographs were 4 years old and very weathered after all. Ursula scanned the crowd for any signs of their to-be husbands. The sound of a carriage approaching drew the attention of the sisters. As it rolled to a stop, a handsome man with long hair stepped out. He wore a well-tailored suit. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his silvery eyes held a sharp glint. Ursula's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. Could it be? She glanced at Amelia, who was already beaming. It was he. Good afternoon, ladies, he said with a charming smile before turning to Amelia. I'm Thomas Pearson. I assume you must be Amelia. Ursula glanced at her sister, who had turned pink. Her heart warmed at the sight. Thomas was strikingly handsome, and he was refined and confident. One would think he was the son of a wealthy industrialist or a politician, not a rancher in the West. He seemed every bit like the man Amelia had described in her letters. And you must be Ursula, he said, turning to Ursula. Before she could respond, a young woman emerged from the carriage as well. Ding. She had long, wavy blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, and her features bore a familial resemblance to Thomas. Hello, she said, waving. I'm Sarah, Thomas's sister. It's a pleasure to meet you both. Amelia stepped forward. It's wonderful to finally meet you, Thomas. And you too, Sarah. Thomas extended his hand to Amelia, who took it with a shy smile. You're even more beautiful in person, Amelia. Amelia colored even deeper. Thank you, she managed to say, even though her voice was barely above a whisper. Thomas and Sarah were welcoming. Closing her eyes, Ursula made a silent prayer of thanksgiving, easing the initial tension. Just as Ursula began to feel at ease, another carriage approached. This one was newer, its polished exterior gleaming in the sunlight. As it came to a halt, a ruggedly handsome man stepped out. At once, she recognized who he was. Heat crept up her cheeks. Ethan Garrett was tall and broad-shouldered, his woody brown hair slightly tousled and his face tanned from long days spent under the sun. A low beard lined his chiseled face. His blue eyes were piercing, yet there was a gentleness in his gaze that softened his rugged appearance. He wore a worn leather vest over a simple shirt, and his woolen trousers and boots were just as neat. His eyes met hers, and they widened. He smiled, which made him all the more handsome. Then he stopped. Thomas glanced in his direction. The two men locked eyes, and Ethan's smile disappeared. He clenched his fists, and his eyebrows pulled together in a deep frown. Thomas wasn't smiling as well. The two men stared daggers at each other, oblivious to the two sisters. Tension crackled in the air. The hostility between the two men was palpable, making her uneasy. Thomas gave Ethan a curt nod. Ethan Garrett, didn't expect to see you here. I didn't know you were getting a mail-order bride. Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. I didn't think I needed to inform others of my personal decisions. Well, I am. This beautiful young lady will become my bride soon. I'll marry Ursula, right here and now if she'll have me. Ursula's heart skipped a beat, then began to race. She looked at Ethan, trying to read his expression. All that was evident was glaring fury. The suddenness of his declaration left her reeling. Was he saying this from his heart or just out of disdain? Amelia's eyes widened, and the sisters stared at each other. Ursula wanted to speak, but her throat was too tight. Deep down, she felt unsettled by the clear animosity between the two men, but she couldn't ruin the opportunity for a better life for herself and her sister. Thomas's frown deepened. Clicking his tongue, he turned to Amelia. He held out his hand to her. "Come along, Amelia. We should get going." Amelia shot a drooping glance at Ursula, but she followed Thomas without a word. She waved, and Ursula waved back. Ursula's heart ached as she watched her sister leave with Thomas, the man Ethan seemed to have some trouble with. Ethan sighed, then turned to Ursula. His gaze had softened. The fury was gone. "I'm Ethan Garrett," he said, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ursula." Ursula took his hand, but her grip trembled slightly. "I already know." Ethan's steady eyes held hers. Then they dropped. "I'm sorry about all that," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It's just, there's history between Thomas and me. I shouldn't have let it affect this moment." His sincerity calmed her nerves a bit. She nodded, managing a small smile. "I understand. It's just a lot to take in. Did you mean what you said about us getting married today?" He smiled. "I did. Would you like to get married today?" Ursula shelved her earlier reservations. She was here to be his wife anyway. What difference did the timing make? "I don't mind." Her answer brought a charming grin from him. "Let's get you settled," he said, pointing to the carriage. "We have a lot to do, and I want to make sure you're comfortable." As she climbed into the carriage, Ursula's mind whirled. The interior of the carriage was plush and comfortable, but she couldn't rest. A part of her couldn't shake the nagging fear that the enmity between Ethan and Thomas would cast a shadow over her new life and her relationship with Amelia. Ethan climbed in beside her. "I promise, I'll do my best to make you happy here. It'll be different from New York." There was a warmth in his eyes that made her feel a bit more at ease. As the carriage rolled away from the platform, Ursula glanced back, catching a final glimpse of Amelia with Thomas in his carriage. Then she sighed. Things would be very different in Rainbow Falls. The courthouse loomed before Ursula. It was bigger than most of the wooden houses around, but she'd seen bigger buildings in New York. Well, this was a small town, so she didn't expect much. The day had passed by very fast, and by now the sun was about to dip into the far west. Ursula and Ethan had stopped by an inn earlier in the day, so Ursula could change and get some rest. And she had now changed from her old but neat dress into a newer one. It all still felt so surreal to her. Now it was time for them to become husband and wife. She glanced at him for the umpteenth time, her face still colored. "Thank you for the dress." "You're welcome. You don't have to keep thanking me, you know." He held her hand in his. "Let's go." That slight hold sent shivers through her, and she blushed even more deeply. But she didn't have time to reflect as he led her through the doors. As they stepped inside, Ursula took in the surroundings. The interior was simple. A large hall with a large desk at the far end and wooden pews lining the sides. He led her to a smaller adjoining hall with a large desk at the front where the magistrate and his clerk sat. The room had a musty smell that Ursula guessed was of aged wood and ink. The walls were adorned with framed documents and the town's seal. Ethan guided Ursula to the front of the room, where the magistrate, an older man with a stern face but a kind gaze, stood waiting. The clerk, a young woman with a neat bun and spectacles perched on her nose, was poised to take notes. "Good afternoon," the magistrate said, greeting them with a nod. "I am Magistrate Brantley. Are you both ready to proceed?" Ursula's nerves fluttered, but she managed to nod. She realized Ethan had arranged this beforehand. At that moment, she remembered him mentioning stepping out before she retreated to her room. His thoughtfulness brought a small smile to her face. "Yes, we are." Ethan squeezed her hand. "We're ready." Brantley nodded and picked up a document from the desk. "Very well. This won't take long." Ursula's heart raced as the magistrate began to recite the ceremony. This was it. It was the moment she had dreamed of ever since she received Ethan's first reply to her letter, yet it felt so surreal. She glanced at Ethan, who met her gaze with a steady look. He smiled, and her heart throbbed. She took a deep breath, focusing on the words being spoken. "Do you, Ethan Garrett, take Ursula to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, from this day forward. Magistrate Brantley's question echoed through the hall. Ethan turned to Ursula, smiling warmly. When he spoke, his voice was strong and clear. And do you, Ursula Sears, take Ethan Garrett to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, from this day forward? Ursula's heart swelled. This was a chance at a better life. She looked into Ethan's eyes and found a glimmer that reassured her. I do, she said, nodding to Brantley. The magistrate smiled. By the authority vested in me by the state of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan nodded. The clerk stepped forward with the marriage certificate, and Ethan and Ursula each took turns signing it. The finality of it, as the ink dried on the paper, made it all feel real. Ursula's hand trembled as she signed her name, but she managed to steel herself. She was no longer Ursula Sears. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Garrett, the magistrate said, offering them both a handshake. I wish you both a happy and prosperous life together. Thank you, Ethan replied, shaking the magistrate's hand. Ursula did the same, even as her mind was still reeling. As they left the courthouse, hand in hand, it remained that way. The sun was lower in the sky now, casting a golden glow over the town. In less than an hour, dusk would set in, then nightfall. Then a new day would follow, with her as Ethan's wife. Ethan squeezed her hand, and she looked up at him, summoning a smile. But as they entered the carriage, her sister came to mind once more. Was she in town by now? Where was Thomas's ranch? And what would they do about their husbands being rivals? Chapter 4. Ethan glanced at his pocket watch, then out the window. The bright rays of the morning crept through the curtains, lighting up the living room. He smiled. He'd been awake since the first light of dawn. He had hardly slept. How could he, when his mind was too preoccupied with thoughts of the previous day? His smile widened. Marrying Ursula had felt like a dream, one that he was afraid to wake from. He couldn't believe his luck. The fact that a woman as stunning as Ursula had answered his advertisement for a mail-order bride was so surreal. Ursula's beauty was beyond anything he had expected. Her hair, a cascade of rich, deep brown waves, framed a delicate face that contained those deep hazel eyes that had a way of looking right into him. Her skin was smooth and fair, even though it was obvious from her letters and the roughness of her hand that she didn't have it easy growing up. Then there was her smile. Ethan's chest fluttered as he remembered it. Her smile was bright enough to light up the darkest of days. She was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, even in the simplest of dresses. And she was his wife. Ethan shook his head, trying to focus. As thrilled as he was, there was one thing that bugged him. Her sister, Amelia, had married Thomas Pearson. By relation, he was Thomas's brother-in-law. Even in his wildest dreams, he couldn't have imagined it. How would this affect his marriage to Ursula? Would the animosity spill over and create rifts between the sisters? He couldn't have that on his conscience. The twins were close. Even he couldn't go against that. But it was too late for regrets or second thoughts. He was married now, and he had promised Ursula he would show her around the ranch today. He had to put his worries aside and focus on making their marriage a happy one. With a deep breath, Ethan straightened his jacket. He needed to start the day right. The sound of footsteps drumming against the stairs caught his attention, and he turned. And at once, his mouth fell open. Ursula emerged from her room, her beauty once again taking his breath away. She wore a simple dress, one of the few he'd gotten for her, but she looked like something out of a fairy tale to him. The soft fabric clung to her form just enough to hint at the curves beneath, and the bright yellow color brought out the warmth in her eyes. She moved with light, graceful steps. Ethan was dumbstruck. His mouth opened and closed as he struggled to find words. He finally composed himself, a smile breaking across his face. "Morning, Ursula?" "Good morning." Her voice was soft. Ethan cleared his throat. "Are you ready for our tour of the ranch?" Ursula smiled back, and to Ethan, the whole room brightened. "I am. I've been looking forward to it." He nodded with a grin, then waved to the door. They stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The blue of the sky stretched on, with just a few wisps of clouds present. Birds chirped in the distance, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh hay and earth. Ethan led the way as they walked. The land stretched out before them, open fields and gently rolling hills dotted with clusters of trees and crisscrossed by sturdy wooden fences. Ethan's chest swelled as he walked on. He glanced at Ursula. Her gaze was fixed on the sprawling expanse. He'd poured his heart and soul into rebuilding this ranch, and his efforts weren't wasted. Now he had someone to share his vision with. That, to him, was the best thing about marrying Ursula. They stopped at a fence. Beyond it was the main field where cattle roamed and a few men on horses whistled in the distance. Ethan stretched his hands, encompassing the scene. He turned to her. "Here's the main field. We're still clearing out more land just by the stream. I started with just a few heads of cattle, but we've grown steadily. Got some fine breeds here now." Ursula's eyes sparkled. "It's beautiful. I've never seen anything like it. I'm guessing it's nothing like New York." Smiling, she shook her head. "There aren't any fields in New York like this. It's all houses, factories, and people." He chuckled. "I don't think I like the sound of that." She turned to face him. "I think I like this place very much. It's calm and serene here. You've accomplished so much." Ethan smiled, his chest warming. "Thank you. It's been a lot of hard work, but it's worth it. Over there is the barn, where we keep the supplies and equipment. I built it myself with help from the hands." They walked further, passing by a small, well-maintained garden where rows of vegetables grew in neat lines. Ursula stopped to stare, and Ethan stopped as well. Did she like gardens? "This is our kitchen garden, fresh produce for the table. Mrs. Jenkins, the cook, tends to it mostly, but I help out when I can." Ursula kneeled, studying the vegetables more closely. When her gaze moved to his, there were unshed tears in her eyes. Her smile widened. "It's wonderful. I've always wanted to have a garden. Ma would tell me stories about lovely homes in the country with little gardens like this." A lump formed in Ethan's throat at her words. Her mother's death was one of the things she mentioned in her letters. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said. Ursula stood. Her glimmering eyes grew distant, and she gave a small nod. "Thank you. It's been hard, but I know she's at peace now. I just know it." They walked in silence for a moment, the only sounds being the rustle of leaves and the lowing of cattle. Ethan stopped in the shade of an oak tree, gazing into the horizon. "My father passed away when I was young, and I set out to achieve all I've dreamed of. This ranch is part of that dream. That's why I do everything I do." Ursula placed a hand on his arm. "I'm sorry about your father, Ethan. I'm sure he'd be very proud of what you've done so far." Ethan nodded, smiling at her. "Thank you." The conversation fell into a comfortable silence as they continued walking. Ethan fixed his gaze on her. She was young, but she had already been through a lot. Yet somehow, she didn't let that bring her down. Her strength was admirable. "Ethan," she said, cutting through his thoughts, "can I ask you something?" He blinked. She interrupted his thoughts. "Of course." Ursula hesitated for a moment, and Ethan raised a brow. What was on her mind? "What happened between you and Thomas Pearson?" The question hit him like a jolt from the blue. His jaw tightened. He turned away, fisting his hands. "That's a matter best left in the past." His voice had turned curt. Ursula didn't back down. "I'm asking for my sister. I dreamed of having dinners with both her and her husband and spending time together as a family. I hoped we could do that." Ethan's brows pulled together, but he kept his voice measured. "That will not happen, Ursula. The Pearsons and the Garretts don't mix." The warmth of their earlier conversation disappeared. Ethan's muscles tightened as his mind spun. What he was trying to avoid had just been thrown in his face. He didn't want to talk about it. He spotted one of his ranch hands nearby and called out to him. "Jerry, can you show Mrs. Garrett to the ranch house? I have somewhere to be." Ursula frowned slightly, but Ethan glanced away. He had to. He couldn't bear the hurt. "Is there any trouble?" Ethan shook his head, forcing a smile. "No trouble. There's just some business to attend to. I'll be back before lunch." He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Ursula standing there with Jerry. His mind raced with thoughts of Thomas Pearson and the long-standing feud between their families. He didn't want to drag Ursula into that mess, but he also couldn't ignore the fact that she was a part of his family now, which meant she was a part of all this. A few minutes later, Ethan mounted a horse and rode off. His heart grew heavy. Gritting his teeth, he whipped the reins. The horse went into a gallop, and the wind blew against his face. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, especially with Thomas lurking around. He couldn't forget everything, not after what he had been through. Ethan pulled on the reins, and the horse slowed. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. He had promised Ursula a life of happiness and stability, and he intended to keep that promise. But first, he needed to deal with the present. There was the problem with the stream. At the edge of Thomas's land was a stream that stretched directly from a waterfall outside town. That stream was one of the most valued sources of water around, and, most importantly, it lay on his land, if only just. Thomas laid claim to the water. To him, it was a part of his land. Ethan clenched his fists. The thought of Thomas Pearson claiming that vital water source was unbearable. History was about to repeat itself. He wouldn't let it. Arriving at his destination, Ethan dismounted and tied his horse to a lamppost outside. A wagon passed by, its clatter distracting him briefly. Dust rose in lazy swirls beneath the hooves of his horse, settling on the well-worn boardwalk that stretched along the main street. He took a deep breath, steadying himself as he glanced at the small building. This stout, unassuming wooden structure, made of wooden planks painted a crisp, respectable white, housed the law office of Samuel Hart. Taking a deep breath, Ethan squared his shoulders and pushed open the door. The interior was dim and cool. The office was modest but well kept, with shelves lined with legal books and a large oak desk in the center. Behind the desk sat Samuel, a seasoned lawyer with a thin, fox-like face and a reputation for being shrewd. He looked up from a book he was reading, adjusting the spectacles on his nose. He squinted his thin eyes further, and his thin lips broke into a wide smile. "Morning, Mr. Hart," Ethan greeted, removing his hat. "Howdy, Ethan," Samuel replied, placing the book down and leaning forward. "What brings you in today?" Ethan took a seat opposite the lawyer, his face pulled tight. "It's about the stream at the edge of my ranch." "I guessed so," Samuel said, so quietly that it almost seemed like he was talking to himself. "Has Thomas dropped the claim?" "No. He still claims it belongs to him, Mal, but I have reason to believe otherwise." Mr. Hart leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his chest. "I see. Water rights can be a tricky business, especially out here in the West." Ethan sucked in air between his clenched teeth. One of the first things he planned to do upon returning was fence his land around the stream and secure the water source for his cattle. Thomas opposed that, citing ownership. He was doing the same thing his father did. What if Thomas wanted to resort to underhanded tactics to claim the stream, like Thomas's father did to his? "I'm determined to get that stream, Mr. Hart, but I want to do it within the bounds of the law. I can't afford any more trouble with the Pearsons." Mr. Hart nodded, tapping his fingers on the desk. "You're right to want to proceed carefully. The law regarding water rights in these parts is based on the doctrine of prior appropriation. First in time, first in right. The city, if you can prove that your family has been using the stream for a longer period, you might have a strong claim." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "But how do I prove that?" "Well, you'll need to gather evidence. Any documentation your father might have left behind, records of use, or witnesses who can attest to your family's historical use of the stream. You could also have a surveyor map out the stream and establish its course with your property." Ethan's mind raced. These were possible. There were old papers and journals in the attic of the ranch house, which his father had kept. There were a few old-timers in town who had known his father and might be willing to testify on his behalf. "What about fencing the land?" Ethan asked. "Will that help my case?" Samuel clicked his tongue. "Careful with that. You don't want to be encroaching on what might legitimately be Pearson's land until the boundaries are legally set." Ethan sighed. Securing the stream would be harder than he thought, but at least he had a path forward. "Can we discuss your plan in detail?" "I'll pay you for your time." Samuel gave a small smile. "That's what I'm here for. Let's get on with it." Chapter 5. Ethan's home really had a lot going for it. Ursula stood in the entryway of Ethan's sprawling ranch house, taking in the sheer size and beauty of her new home. It wasn't the biggest she'd seen, but it was more homely and comfortable. Wooden beams adorned the high ceilings, and richly colored tapestries lined the walls. The floor, made of polished hardwood, was smooth under her feet. The furniture was sturdy, made from the finest oak and leather. The main living area boasted a large stone fireplace. Comfortable leather armchairs and a plush sofa surrounded a heavy wooden table. As Ursula walked through the house, she noticed the thoughtful touches Ethan had made to ensure she felt at home. They brought a smile to her face. The kitchen was better than any she'd ever seen, with a large cast-iron stove, copper pots and pans hanging from hooks, and shelves stocked with various spices and cooking supplies. A long wooden dining table, capable of seating a dozen people, was arranged in a smaller, adjoining area. Ursula moved upstairs to her private quarters. Her bedroom was spacious, with a large four-poster bed draped in soft, clean linens and a quilt that looked hand-stitched. There was a dressing table with a mirror, a wardrobe filled with new dresses, and a small writing desk by the window. Ethan had truly thought of everything, even down to the lace curtains that framed the windows. Her eyes watered. She almost couldn't believe she'd been living in a run-down tenement only 4 months ago. Her mother would have loved Ethan's home. She wiped her tears and swallowed her sobs. Her mother would want her to move on. Despite the splendor around her, Ursula felt a pang of longing for her sister. What was Amelia up to? Was she being treated well? Did she also live in a beautiful house? Ursula's breath hitched. The sinking feeling that her hopes for a new and happy life were slipping away gnawed at her. She didn't even know where Thomas's ranch was, let alone how to get there. Glancing out the window, Ursula's lips parted. The view of her bedroom was a beautiful one. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the landscape. It was past noon. Ethan still wasn't back. Why was he taking so long? To distract herself from the worry, Ursula decided to start preparing dinner. She moved to the kitchen and was gathering ingredients when the front door creaked open. Her face lit up. "Ethan, you?" Ursula froze at the doorway to the living room. A middle-aged woman stepped inside, carrying a basket filled with foodstuffs and other items. The woman was tall and stout, with a friendly face framed by graying hair tucked under a bonnet. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Well, howdy there, miss," the woman said, smiling warmly. "You must be Mrs. Garrett. I'm Isa Jenkins, the housekeeper and cook." Ursula placed her hand on her chest, heaving a sigh. Ethan has mentioned her. Then she smiled. "Yes, I'm Ursula. It's a pleasure to meet you, Isa. I was just about to start on dinner." Isa set the basket down on the kitchen counter and began unloading the items. A deep frown colored her face. "Oh, no need for that, dear. Cooking's my job. You just sit back and relax." Ursula shook her head. "I'd like to help if you don't mind. It'll keep my mind occupied." Isa looked at her for a moment, then shrugged. "Well, if you insist. I reckon an extra pair of hands wouldn't hurt anyone." The two women worked side by side, preparing a hearty meal of cookies for appetizers, roast beef, potatoes, and fresh vegetables. Ursula found comfort in preparing the ingredients, and Isa's friendly chatter helped ease her worries. "You're quite good, ma'am," Isa said as she sliced carrots with practiced ease. "Where'd you learn?" "Proceder." "From my mother," Ursula replied, smiling at the memory. "She taught both Amelia and me everything she knew." Isa nodded, beaming. "That's the way it should be. Family is important. I'm glad Mr. Garrett saw that." Ursula hesitated for a moment before broaching the subject that had been weighing on her mind. She inhaled. Isa, do you know anything about the feud between Ethan and Thomas? Isa paused, her knife hovering over a potato. Well, I've heard bits and pieces. I don't know the full story. Ain't worked here long. Seems they've been at odds for a long time, mostly over that stream. Both of 'em claim it, and neither's willing to back down. Ursula returned to cutting, her gaze dropping. It's such a shame. I had hoped we could have family dinners with my sister and her husband. It seems that might be impossible. Don't you worry, ma'am. Things have a way of working themselves out. Just give it time. Please, call me Ursula. I insist. Isa smiled. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Was that Ethan? Ursula rushed over, eager to see her husband. She hoped he was in a better mood, but when she opened the door, it wasn't Ethan standing there. Instead, it was a young ranch hand with a dusty hat in his hand and a sheepish grin on his face. He looked no older than 13. Evenin', ma'am, the young man greeted, nodding politely. Name's Howard. I was hoping to speak with Mr. Garrett about some grazing matters. Studying him, Ursula noted his boyish features and the earnest look in his eyes. I'm afraid Ethan isn't home at the moment. He's gone into town on some business. Howard's face fell, but then he sniffed the air and his face lit up with a wide grin. Well, that's a shame. Sure smells good in there, though. Just like my mama's cookies, oh boy. An idea sparked in Ursula's mind. She needed to get a message to Amelia, but she didn't want to offend Ethan by reaching out to Thomas's ranch directly. Perhaps Howard could be the solution. She fell silent for a while, and her lips slowly curled. Why don't you wait on the porch, Howard? I'll be right back. The young man stared blankly, but nodded. Sure thing, ma'am. Ursula hurried to her room, her heart pounding. She quickly penned a letter to Amelia. Dear Amelia, I hope this letter finds you well. I miss you terribly and long to hear how you are settling in. I have so many things to share, but most of all, I want to know you're safe and happy. Your loving sister, Ursula. It was short, but it would do. Folding the paper, she tucked it into an envelope. Taking a deep breath, she headed back to the kitchen, where Isa was getting ready to prepare the beef. She grabbed a plate and selected some freshly baked cookies. I'll be right back. Isa raised an eyebrow but nodded. All right, dear. Just let me know if you need anything. Ursula stepped out onto the porch, where Howard was sitting on the wooden bench, his hat resting beside him. She offered him the plate of cookies with a warm smile. I thought you might enjoy these while you wait. Howard's eyes lit up, and he grinned. He took the plate and picked up a cookie. Thank you kindly, ma'am. These are mighty fine. Ursula sat beside him, watching as he devoured the cookies. When Howard finished the last cookie, he wiped his hands on his trousers and grinned at her. He handed her the plate. Those were some of the best cookies I ever had. Thank you again. As he stood to leave, Ursula touched his arm gently. Howard, may I ask a favor of you? The young man paused, his brows raised. Sure thing, ma'am. What you need? Ursula chose her words with care. My sister is married to Thomas Pearson, and I need to get a letter to her. Prosody rate. I know there's some bad blood between the Pearsons and the Garretts, but she's my sister, and I need to know she's all right. Howard's face clouded with a slight frown. Well, ma'am, it's true there's bad blood between the two families, but I reckon I could help. I got a cousin working over at the Pearson Ranch. He could get the letter to her. Ursula's heart soared. Thank you, Howard. I appreciate this more than you know. She handed him the letter, and he tucked it into his shirt pocket. I'll make sure it gets to her, he said, smiling. With those words, he ran off. Ursula's heart warmed as she watched him disappear down the path, the dust kicking up behind him. Finally, she could communicate with her sister. She had always been one with Amelia. She wasn't about to let that change. Chapter 6. Easy, boy. The sun was already sinking low in the sky. Ethan Garrett stood near the stream, his shirt sticking to his back with sweat. He lunged back, his breath coming in sharp, labored bursts. He'd been working for hours to break in one of his new horses, a massive, wild stallion that had given him more trouble than any horse he had ever tamed. The stallion was magnificent to look at, all muscle and sinew, with a coat as brown as leather and a dark mane. Its eyes were wild. Ethan drew in another long breath. It would take every ounce of his skill and strength to break the animal's spirit without breaking its heart. I mean you no harm. I just want to ride you. You'll be all right. The horse neighed and snorted. After working the horse in a pen for days, allowing it to run in circles to burn off some of its nervous energy, he couldn't believe the beast still had this much in it. The horse stopped moving. It was his cue. Moving closer, he whispered to the horse while grabbing the reins. Then he saddled the horse once more. It resumed its struggle, bucking and rearing. Ethan held on, gripping the reins firmly. The struggle got even fiercer, but he didn't fall. This time, he rode out the storm. It was done. At last, the stallion had exhausted itself and stood, trembling and sweating, but compliant. Ethan gave the horse a gentle nudge with his heels, and the stallion started forward. They moved in a wide circle around the clearing. Ethan guided the stallion through turns and changes of pace until his face lit with a satisfied grin. The horse was under control. "You're a fierce one, eh? I think I'll name you Bucky." The horse neighed. Ethan tapped its neck, chuckling. He was just about to dismount when he noticed someone in the distance. He squinted. The familiar figure was running along the path that led toward the Pearson ranch. It was Howard, his youngest ranch hand. Howard mostly performed menial tasks around the ranch. He was heading to the Pearson ranch. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he watched Howard disappear over the hill. His brows creased. What was Howard doing heading toward the Pearson ranch? Nobody could send him on an errand to that area. Then his eyes widened and he drew a sharp breath. The boy might be a spy for Thomas Pearson. Had Thomas planted Howard on his ranch to gather information, or was the boy simply willing to betray Ethan for a few extra dollars? It couldn't be. Ethan clenched his jaw. He could call Howard back to confront him and demand an explanation, but that might tip his hand too early. The boy could find excuses. If he were a spy, he would be more careful in the future. No, it was better to watch and wait. He needed more evidence. With a heavy heart, Ethan straddled the tamed horse. The horse had done well. Ethan's muscles ached from the effort of the morning's work, but his mind was elsewhere. Did Howard betray him? As he rode back to the ranch, his eyes scanned the horizon, looking for any sign of trouble. Dusk was slowly setting in, and the air was thick with dust, but none of that mattered. If he was right, Thomas Pearson was one step ahead of him. When he reached the ranch, he dismounted and handed the reins to one of the other ranch hands. "Take care of him," he said, his eyes still fixed on the distance, as if Howard would suddenly appear. "I've got some business to attend to." Ethan walked briskly toward one of the barns. Some of his men were hard at work hauling hay for the horses. He took a deep breath and cleared his throat. The ranch hands looked up from their tasks, nodding at him. "I see you all are hard at work. Good job. Here's what to do after clearing the hay. I need some of you to keep an eye on the north fence. Make sure there are no breaks. We've had some cattle wandering too close to the edge. Prosody percent, and check the water troughs. Some of them need refilling." The men nodded, grabbing their tools and continuing their work. Ethan scanned the group. A knot tightened in his chest. "Has anyone seen Howard?" The men exchanged glances. One of them, a tall, lanky fellow named Jake, shrugged. "Ain't seen him since this morning, boss. Thought he was doing chores around the south pasture." Ethan frowned, trying to keep his irritation in check. "Well, if you see him, send him my way. I've got some tasks I need him to handle." Jake nodded, tipping his hat. "Sure thing, Mr. Garrett." Ethan turned away, his mind racing. The men seemed oblivious. Too oblivious. Were they in on it too? He shook his head. He couldn't label everyone a spy. As he walked back toward the stables, the steady clomp of boots behind him made him turn. Wyatt, his foreman, was approaching. "Something on your mind, boss?" Wyatt asked, studying Ethan's face. Ethan forced a smile, shaking his head. I'm just trying to keep things running smoothly, Wyatt. Howard's gone missing, and I'm getting a bit concerned. Wyatt nodded, folding his arms. Howard's a good kid. Probably just stepped out for a bite or got sidetracked. You know how these young'uns can be, always chasing after some distraction. Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Even Wyatt didn't know. That meant Howard was acting alone if he was indeed a spy, or his men were lying to him. Yeah, you're probably right. It's just, with everything going on, I can't help but worry. We've got a lot riding on this place. Wyatt clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Ain't nothing we can't handle, boss. You've done a fine job here, and the men respect you. Don't let small matters bother you. Even though he was beside himself, Ethan smiled. Making Wyatt his foreman was the best decision. Wyatt was handling things well. Thanks, Wyatt. I appreciate that. Just keep an eye out, all right? Make sure everyone's pulling their weight. Wyatt grinned, tipping his hat. You got it, boss. Ethan watched as Wyatt headed back to the men. For now, he would trust them. He couldn't afford to live in constant fear and suspicion. His smile faded as his thoughts kept drifting back to Howard and the Pearson ranch. He also couldn't ignore the possibility that Thomas Pearson might be scheming against him. He made up his mind to keep an eye on Howard. Ethan began heading back toward his house. It was late. He'd been in the field all day. He needed to clear his head. As he walked, the faint sound of laughter rang out. He smiled, recognizing Ursula's voice mingled with Isa's. It warmed his heart to know that she was starting to settle into her new life. The glow of lanterns flickered through the windows of the ranch house. He paused just outside, peering through the glass. Inside, Isa and Ursula were sitting at the table. Their heads were bent over something small. He watched as Ursula threw her head back, her laughter ringing out once more. Then she returned her gaze to a grinning Isa, who demonstrated the fine art of crocheting. Ursula's attempts were clumsy, but endearing. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off Ursula. There was a warmth in her smile that captivated him. His breath hitched, and his pulse quickened as he watched her. The world behind him fell away, leaving only Ursula. Drawing a deep breath, he opened the door and stepped inside. The two women looked up. Ursula's face lit up. Ethan! She rose to her feet, crossing the room in a few quick strides and wrapping her arms around him in a warm embrace. For a moment, he stood frozen, his heart hammered. Then slowly he relaxed into the hug, his arms encircling her. She was soft and warm against him, and he took a deep whiff of her flowery scent. She smelled like lavender. At once, his tense muscles eased. "We've been waiting for you," she said, pulling back slightly to look up at him. "I'm glad." All thoughts of Thomas and the day's troubles melted away in her presence. "Dinner's ready. We wanted you to come before we ate." Ethan turned to Isa, flashing her a warm grin. Dinner was a familial affair. Ursula was a balm to Ethan's mind, and he found himself watching her more than he ate. After dinner, he rose and offered her his arm. "Shall I escort you to your room?" She nodded, taking his arm. When they stepped into the dimly lit room, Ursula turned to him. "Ethan, may I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, raising a brow. "Why aren't we sharing a room?" For a moment, Ethan was too stunned to answer. He hadn't expected the question. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I didn't want to rush you. We only sent a few letters to each other before you arrived, and I thought it best to get to know each other better before becoming," he cleared his throat, "more intimate." Ursula's eyes softened, and she smiled. "Thank you for being considerate." She stepped closer and hugged him again. This time, Ethan didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. When they pulled back, their eyes locked. Ethan couldn't resist the pull. He leaned in, his lips capturing hers in a tender, lingering kiss. It was brief, but it made his chest flutter. He couldn't believe it was finally happening. When they finally parted, Ethan's heart was racing. "Good night, Ursula," he said, his voice husky. "Good night, Ethan," she replied, a soft smile playing on her lips. He returned her smile. As he turned to leave, she held his hand. "Please wait, one more thing." He paused, looking back at her. "Yes? I miss Amelia, and I want to see her again. Could we invite her over for tea tomorrow?" Her gaze was longing. Ethan smiled. Any lingering animosity toward Thomas was momentarily forgotten. "Of course we can. I'd like that. I'll ask Wyatt to send one of the men over." Ursula beamed at him. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me. By way of answer, he drew her close and kissed her forehead. With a final smile, Ethan left her room and made his way to his. As he lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about the kiss they had shared. He turned, trying to ignore the throbbing in his chest. He allowed himself to revel in the warmth of Ursula's affection. What did tonight mean for them? He couldn't wait to find out. Chapter 7. Ursula sighed for the umpteenth time as she sat by the window, crocheting. She tried to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting to her sister. Had Howard delivered her invitation yet? Her hands trembled slightly. She groaned. She made another mistake. She had to undo several stitches before starting again. The house and its surroundings were quiet, save for the distant sounds of the ranch hands at work. Ursula glanced out the window, searching for any sign of a visitor. Her heart pounded every time she thought she saw a figure approaching, only to realize it was just a shadow or a trick of the light. How long would it take? Her mind went through the possibilities. What if Howard had encountered some trouble? What if Thomas didn't let Amelia leave for Ethan's ranch? It wasn't impossible. There was still the feud to worry about. Her fingers froze for a while. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Ursula's heart leaped and she jumped to her feet, nearly knocking over her crochet basket. She ran to the door, her breath quickening. When she opened it, her eyes filled with tears. "Amelia!" she cried, throwing her arms around her sister. Ursula and Amelia embraced tightly. Tears poured out of her eyes as they clung to each other. "I'm so glad you're here. I missed you so much," Amelia said, her voice choked with tears. "It feels like it's been forever." They finally pulled back, wiping their tears and smiling at each other. Ursula ushered Amelia inside and led her to the sitting room. They sat on the couch, still holding hands. Ursula didn't want to let go. "Tell me everything. How have you been? What's it like at the Pearson Ranch?" Amelia sighed. This made Ursula's pulse quicken, but she braced herself for whatever truth she might hear. "It's overwhelming, to say the least. Don't get me wrong, Tom's a wonderful man. He's been kind and caring, but he has a large family. His sister, who has kids of her own, lives there too. Her husband passed away a few years ago. Then there's his uncle and a few other relatives. It's a big, extended family, and I never seem to have a moment to myself." Ursula frowned. Her heart ached for her sister. Amelia didn't thrive in situations where there were many people. She only worked at the factory and the laundry back in New York because she had no choice, and she never spoke to anyone but Ursula unless it was necessary. "That sounds exhausting. How are you managing?" "I'm doing my best," Amelia said with a small, sad smile. "Still, it's difficult. Tom's sister is very dominant. She's taken over the house and I don't even know my place there. I haven't been able to get close to Thomas the way I'd hoped." Ursula squeezed her sister's hand. "I'm so sorry, Amelia. I wish there was something I could do. It's not your fault." Amelia shook her head, smiling. "But tell me about you. How's Ethan? How have you found him so far? How's life on this ranch?" "Ethan is kind," Ursula said, a soft smile touching her lips. "But he's always so busy. He leaves before I wake up and often returns after dinner time, and we still haven't shared a bed." Amelia's eyebrows shot up. "Really? That's unexpected. But perhaps he's just being considerate. Give it time." "I hope so, but there's something else I wanted to talk to you about. The feud between Ethan and Thomas." Amelia's face clouded. "Tom mentioned it. He says Ethan wants to steal the stream, which he claims is rightfully his." Ursula frowned. Something wasn't right here. Ethan says the same thing. Who's lying and who's not? Perhaps they're both lying, or they're both telling the truth. "I still don't know about the feud, but I once overheard Tom's uncle say it didn't start with them. It had something to do with their fathers." Ursula huffed. "They're both so stubborn, but we're family now. We need to find a way to resolve this." The sisters sat in silence for a moment, lost in thought. Then Amelia's eyes widened, and she turned. "What if we suggested that they share the stream? It seems like a reasonable compromise. The stream is big enough for both ranches." Ursula's eyes lit up. "That's a wonderful idea. They're family now, after all. Maybe they'll listen to us." Yet a part of her was still hesitant. What if they didn't, and things got worse? She shook her head. She couldn't think of that. Things had to get better. Amelia smiled. It's worth a try. We need to do something. I'm tired of this constant bickering. I want us to be one large family. I mean, Tom's family is large already, but you know what I mean. Ursula laughed, holding her sister's hands. Oh, I do. I wish the same too, but we need to be careful. They're both very proud men. Ursula didn't know how she would do it, but she had to talk to Ethan. She buried the thought in her mind as she and Amelia moved to more light-hearted conversations, but her sister couldn't stay for long. Hours later, when the sky was painted a dark orange by the setting sun and Amelia was gone, the thought came back to her. Sitting outside on the porch, she debated in her head how she might broach the subject with her husband. She didn't have to wait for long. Ethan soon appeared in the distance, dismounting from his horse and handing it to a ranch hand. He ran his hand through his hair as he took off his hat. His eyes met hers, and he smiled. Ursula. All he did was call her name, yet it sent shockwaves through her that made her skin tingle. She hurried over to him, her footsteps echoing softly on the packed dirt. Despite her inner turmoil, Ursula found herself drawn to him as always. She ran into his outstretched arms, and he pulled her close when they embraced. She closed her eyes and released a heavy breath. Her nerves thrummed inside her, yet at the same time, an overwhelming sense of peace settled in her core. How did Amelia's visit go? Smiling, she began recounting Amelia's visit. Her words spilled out in a rush. When she got to the feud, she slowed. She told me about your family and Thomas's family. It sounds overwhelming, and I don't know the full story, but I understand now why things are so complicated between you and Thomas. It didn't start with the both of you. Ethan listened quietly, his eyes searching hers. Ursula bit her lips and glanced away. Her heart hammered, and she found herself at a loss for words. How would he take her suggestion? Ethan held her chin, tilting her face to his. There's something on your mind. Tell me. Ursula sighed. I was hoping we could find a way to resolve the matter. Maybe we could share the stream. It would help. The two ranches would have water, and our two families. No. He pulled away from her grasp and turned. Her smile faded. When he turned back to her, his gaze had hardened. Ethan, please think about it. We need to find a way to… To what? Solve the crisis because we're one big family? You're young and naive, and it shows, Ursula, he said sharply, his voice cutting through the evening air. You don't understand how things work out here. This land, the stream, it's not just about sharing, it's about survival. Predators in the wild don't survive by sharing with other predators. They protect what's rightfully theirs. Ursula bit her lip, recoiling at his words. We're not animals. Tell that to a man who's ready to do anything to make sure I'm ruined like my father. I can't believe you're siding with him just because your sister is married to him. I'm not. I just thought, as a family, Ursula began, but her voice wavered as her eyes glistened with unshed tears. As a family? This again? This feud goes deeper than you know. I don't expect you to understand. You know what, Ursula? Your approach to life would only make you weak and prone to being taken advantage of. You have to understand that no matter how good-natured you are, there are people who will try to take advantage of you. And if you think you can change that by reasoning with them, you're in for a tough life. More tears stung Ursula's eyes, and they began to spill out. She had known he was passionate about protecting what he had worked so hard to build. But this outburst revealed a side of him she'd never expected. Silence hung heavily between them, broken only by the distant calls of crickets and the soft rustle of the evening breeze through the trees. Ethan closed his eyes, then turned away. Ursula watched him disappear into the house. At that moment, she faced a choice. She could let Ethan's words stand, burying her desires and dreams of reconciling with her sister's new family, or she could confront him, challenge his view, and insist on uncovering the truth behind the feud that had divided them. With a heavy sigh, Ursula wiped away her tears. She would give Ethan the space he needed for now, but she would not give up on her dream. Their families had to be reconciled. Help me, Lord. You've always been there before. Please show me the way, Ursula whispered, turning towards the darkening sky. Wiping a lone tear from her eye, she walked inside. Chapter 8. Why couldn't she understand? Ethan trudged straight to his room, his jaw clenched tight and his mind swirling. The scent of roasted chicken greeted him, but he wasn't hungry. He pushed the door shut behind him, the sound echoing through the quiet house. He couldn't just share the stream. That was absurd. Thomas was his enemy. Ursula didn't know. Would she still tell him to share if she did? Muttering, he moved on to changing his clothes. He'd wash after. As he unbuttoned his shirt, his fingers brushed against a scar just above his abs. The scar had long healed, but the touch pulled him back to a time he had tried so hard to bury. The scar had been etched into his skin during a particularly brutal beating by his father. The memory of that night came rushing back. Ethan was a hungry and tired teenager. The family had fallen on hard times. He and his father, Ben, were struggling to keep their ranch afloat after Jesse Pearson's betrayal. The two men, who were once best friends, were suddenly bitter enemies. Ben's drinking escalated. He was a shell of the man he once was, and he got physical over the slightest provocation. It was a particularly cold and rainy evening. Ethan remembered all too well. His belly growled like a beast. His father stumbled in, reeking of the stench of stale ale as usual. Ethan made the mistake of going up to him and saying, in the most innocent tone, "Pa, I'm hungry." The emptiness in his father's bloodshot eyes remained etched in his memory. Ben turned and snarled, "Hungry, are ya? I'll give you something to fill that lazy belly of yours." With that, he grabbed a nearby belt and lashed out. All Ethan could remember was the leather biting into his flesh, leaving him gasping in pain. He tried to shield himself, but he couldn't predict the swings. Each blow left pain searing through him. He soon became numb to it, blacking out. It was hours later, when he came to, wincing in pain, that he realized the beating left a trail of bruises and cuts. There was blood on his hands. The scar just below his chest was the worst of them, a deep gash that took weeks to heal. He couldn't treat it well, and he almost died from the fever after. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional scars. Each strike drove home the message that he was a worthless burden. Each cut was a constant reminder of Ben's failure. Ethan's hands trembled as he traced the scar. He was working so hard to distance himself from his father's legacy. He wouldn't let anyone, least of all Thomas Pearson, ruin that. Ursula's suggestion was naive. The stream was more than just a water source. It was a symbol of everything he fought for. He shrugged off the rest of his shirt and made his way out of the room and to the outhouse. He passed the kitchen, stopping to notice dinner was untouched. He sighed. Almost an hour later, when he'd washed, he made his way upstairs. The house was quiet, too quiet. He clenched his fist. The harsh words he had flung at Ursula replayed over and over. He reached his room, slammed the door shut, and leaned against it, his chest heaving. He flung himself onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling as the shadows lengthened. But sleep eluded him. He tossed and turned, but it was the same. Ursula's teary face remained in his mind, and his heart sank. It wasn't her fault. She meant well. He should have explained better. He closed his eyes one last time. No luck. Unable to bear it any longer, Ethan swung his legs over the side of the bed and lit a nearby lantern. The soft glow illuminated the room, casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. He grabbed the lantern and headed to Ursula's room, his heart pounding. He knocked softly at first, but there was no answer. Holding his breath, he opened the door and peered inside. Ursula was lying on the bed, her body curled up under the sheets. Her back was turned. He stepped into the room, his footsteps soft on the wooden floor. "Ursula," he whispered, his voice cracking. She stirred, sniffled, and then sat up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen from crying. The sight made his throat tighten, and he struggled to fill his heavy chest with air. He sighed. "I'm so sorry," he said, standing by the bed. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Ursula wiped away her tears and looked up at him. "Why, Ethan? Why is there all this hatred between you and Thomas?" Ethan took a deep breath and sat down on the edge of the bed, the lantern casting a warm glow around them. "It's a long story." His voice trembled, but he went on. "Our fathers, Jesse Pearson and Ben Garrett, were best friends. They migrated to Rainbow Falls together, built their ranches side by side, and had big dreams for their future." He paused, staring into the flickering flame of the lantern as if it could somehow burn away the bitterness that clung to his heart. They struck a deal with a wealthy businessman from the East who needed sheep wool and cowhides. The plan was for Jesse's ranch to provide the wool and my father's ranch to supply the hides. But Jesse turned against his friend. He made a separate deal with the businessman and left my father with nothing. Jesse became rich, and my father, well, he was ruined as he poured everything into producing the hides. They became useless. Ursula listened in silence. What happened to your father? Ethan's jaw tightened as he forced himself to continue. He took to drinking. When I was 15, he left town. I took on odd jobs. Some months later, I heard he got into a fight over a game of faro and was shot. I swore I'd never have anything to do with the Pearsons after that. I also made up my mind to leave and carve a name for myself. Tears welled up in Ursula's eyes as she reached out to take Ethan's hand. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I had no idea. Ethan's eyes softened as he looked at her, and the pain melted away in her warmth. I left town after that and spent years prospecting, but no matter how much time passed, the memories never faded. Ursula squeezed his hand. Thank you for telling me. I can't imagine how hard that must have been for you. But maybe we can find a way to move past it together. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. He pulled her close to him, holding her like his life depended on it. Her head rested against his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt. He stroked her hair, and a sense of peace he hadn't known in a while settled on him. Stay with me tonight, Ursula. Ethan pulled apart and put out the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. Then he lay down with her. He held her close, smiling. As he lay there, listening to the gentle rhythm of her breathing, he made up his mind to fight for the stream, not just for his father's memory, but for the future he wanted to build with Ursula. Put your backs into it, lads. Ethan stood on a slight rise, wiping sweat from his brow. He'd been in the fields all morning. He looked over his men as they worked to put up the new fencing around the ranch. Wyatt, also helping the men out, coordinated the whole affair. The rhythmic pounding of hammers and the steady clink of wire being unspooled filled the air. He watched as his foreman, Wyatt, strode over, huffing. The fencing's long overdue, boss. It's a good thing we're getting it done now. Keeps everything in order, you know? Ethan nodded, though his thoughts were far from the ranch. The events of the previous night lingered in his mind. He still didn't know how to handle Pearson. He needed to clear his head, and a walk seemed like the best way to do it. Keep an eye on things here, Wyatt, Ethan said, turning away from the fencing operation. I need to take a walk. Wyatt tipped his hat. Will do, boss. Ethan made his way toward the stream, his footsteps crunching on the grass. It was almost noon, and the air shimmered with heat. As he approached the stream, he stopped. Two figures stood by the water's edge, Thomas and Amelia. His heart tightened at the sight, and his hands curled into fists. He strode over. Amelia spotted him first, and with a glance at Thomas, excused herself. I'll leave you two to talk, she said, giving Ethan a nod before heading up the hill. Ethan's eyes locked on Thomas. What are you doing here, Thomas? Thomas crossed his arms. Just making sure you're not trying to steal the stream, Garrett. It's not yours. Ethan's jaw tightened. Steal? That's rich coming from a Pearson, Thomas scoffed. We both know the stream belongs to my family. It's been that way since our fathers split the land. Your father cheated mine out of that land, Ethan snapped. Jesse Pearson ruined my father and took advantage of it. I won't let history repeat itself. Thomas took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. Your father was weak. He couldn't handle the competition. Don't blame my father for that. Isn't it time you moved on? You've built your ranch. What more do you want? Don't you dare talk about my father like that, Ethan growled, his fists clenched even tighter. I'm not like him. I'm stronger, and I won't sit down while you rob me of what's mine. Thomas's brows furrowed. This isn't about strength, Garrett. It's about what's fair and just. Ethan's anger flared, and he hoisted a finger. Fair and just? You wouldn't know those words if they hit you in the face. Your father's greed destroyed my family, and now you're trying to do the same to me. Thomas glanced at his clenched fist, then back at him. So now you want to beat your message into me? Ethan stepped back, raising his fists. His blood burned and his muscles tightened. If I have to. Thomas raised a brow, but before he could reply, footsteps echoed behind him. Amelia. Enough. she said, stepping between the two men. Going on like this isn't solving anything. You two have been bickering like little children for so long. Isn't it tiring? Thomas started to speak, but Amelia silenced him with a glare. She turned to Ethan, smiling. Her gaze softened. I want to invite you to our wedding. Ethan was taken aback, his frown disappearing. His brows curled. You want me at your wedding? Yes, Amelia said firmly. We're family now, whether you like it or not, and family should be there for each other. Thomas opened his mouth to protest, but Amelia shot him a look that left him stunned him into silence. Please, Ethan. Ethan's eyes flicked to Thomas, who looked as though he were about to explode, then back to Amelia. I appreciate the invitation, but I won't be there. Amelia's face fell, but she nodded. I hope you'll reconsider. For Ursula's sake. I'll come by to ask you once more. Let's go, Tom. Thank you, Ethan. Ethan watched as she held Thomas's hand and turned away. His cold gaze lingered on Ethan for a moment longer before he went along with Amelia. Ethan gazed at the stream, its clear water ever running. A wedding? His thoughts churned. Did she want them to forget the feud that had festered for too long just for a wedding? His lips curled. Amelia was just like her sister. His smile faded. She was asking too much. He couldn't come. There was no way. Was there? Chapter 9. Ursula stood in the warm kitchen, sniffing the air. She smiled. Apples and cinnamon. Her pie was coming along beautifully. As she rolled out the dough, her thoughts wandered to the previous night. Despite Ethan's initial outburst, they shared a tender moment that gave her hope for their future together. She expected his absence when she woke up earlier, but that didn't stop her from humming and grinning ear to ear as she prepared for the day. Even at that moment, she couldn't stop smiling at herself. She turned. If Isa saw her this way, she would have to answer some questions. Thankfully, Isa was busy bustling around the house, tidying up and humming softly to herself. The older woman was always lively. As Ursula finished layering the apple slices in the pie crust, a knock sounded at the door. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it. Her heart leaped when her eyes met the figure outside. Howard, she said, opening the door wider. The young ranch hand stood there, shifting from foot to foot. Ma'am, he said, tipping his hat. Got a letter for you, from your sister. Ursula's heart skipped a beat as she took the letter from him. Thank you, Howard. He nodded and turned to leave, but she called after him. Wait, would you like to come in for some pie? It's almost ready. Howard hesitated, glancing back at her with a shy smile. Thank you, ma'am, but I have to get back to work. Mr. Garrett will have my hide if I'm late. Ursula smiled warmly. All right then, thank you for bringing this. With a nod, Howard ran off. Ursula closed the door behind him. She turned the envelope over in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She walked back into the kitchen, where Isa looked up from her work. Who was that, dear? Isa asked. Just Howard, bringing a letter for me, Ursula said, her gaze moving from the paper to the older woman. I'm going to read it now. Isa nodded, smiling. Go on then. I'll keep an eye on the pie for you. Ursula returned her smile and retreated to a quiet corner of the kitchen. She broke the seal on the envelope and unfolded the letter, taking in Amelia's familiar handwriting. Dear Ursula, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to let you know what I've heard about the stream. Thomas and Ethan have been arguing again, and it's clear that this feud over the stream isn't going to resolve itself easily. Both men are stubborn, and neither wants to back down. I think it would be best if we met somewhere in town to discuss what to do next. It's too risky for us to keep visiting each other's homes, given the tension between our husbands. There's a small diner on Riverwalk Street, Mabel's Diner. Can you meet me there tomorrow at noon? I miss you so much, and I can't stand seeing you and Ethan caught in the middle of this feud. With love, Amelia. Ursula's chest throbbed as she read her sister's words. Amelia was right. They needed to find a way to resolve the growing tension between their husbands. She carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her apron pocket. Standing up, she turned to Isa, who was busy checking the pie. I'm going to head into town to get some fabrics, Ursula said, trying to keep her voice steady. Would you mind keeping an eye on the pie while I'm gone? Isa straightened and gave her a knowing look. Course I will, dear. You go on and take your time. That pie'll be just fine. Thank you, Isa. Ursula hurried to her room to change. As she donned a simple dress and tied her hair back, she took a deep breath. There had to be a way to bridge the gap between Ethan and Thomas, for her sake and Amelia's. Why was a solution eluding her? With one last glance in the mirror, she grabbed her hat and headed out the door. The walk into town was brisk, as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dirt road. Ursula's mind was preoccupied with thoughts of her upcoming meeting with Amelia. She would tell her sister what Ethan told her. Maybe Amelia could talk to Thomas. Thomas was a good man, and she knew it. Ursula was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't notice the two women ahead until she was nearly upon them. She stopped, holding a hand to her chest as her heart began to hammer. "Oh, I'm so sorry." The red-haired woman she had almost run into turned with a start, but quickly smiled. "No harm done," she said warmly. "You seem to be in quite a hurry. Is everything all right?" Ursula nodded, trying to catch her breath and calm her racing heart. "Yes, I just have a place to be. I'm sorry for not paying attention." The two women each carried a large picnic basket, and their kind smiles put Ursula at ease. "It's quite all right," the other woman with wavy golden hair said. "We're just on our way to the waterfall for a picnic. I'm Tiffany, and this is Agnes." "It's nice to meet you both," Ursula said, managing a smile. "I'm Ursula." Agnes peered at her closely, her eyes narrowing. "Wait a minute, didn't we meet you before? Except you introduced yourself as Amelia and said you were new to town." Tiffany tilted her head, and her eyes widened. "Yes, I remember now. You do look very similar, except for the clothes and the hair." Ursula giggled, then burst into laughter. Agnes and Tiffany glanced at each other, then back at her. As her body rocked with laughter, the tension eased from her shoulders. "I get that a lot." She finally managed to stop laughing. "That was my twin sister you met. I'm Ursula, and she's Amelia." The women's faces lit up, and it was their turn to laugh. "Twins? How wonderful," Tiffany said when they stopped, clapping her hands together. "We'd love to properly meet both of you someday. You both are the first set of twins I've seen in this town." Agnes nodded, grinning. "Yes, we'd love for you to join us for a picnic or a gathering sometime. It would be lovely to get to know you both better. We'll call the others. It's not every day you run into a pair of twins." Warmth traveled to Ursula's cheeks. She was used to being mistaken for Amelia, but the fascination and friendliness weren't everyday occurrences. "I'd like that very much. Thank you for the invitation." Agnes then reached out and gently touched her arm. "I don't know what it is, but no matter what's bothering you, it'll be all right in the end." "How did you—" "I know someone deep in thought when I see them. Are you from here?" Ursula sighed. "I'm from New York. I came here as a mail-order bride." Tiffany smiled. "Agnes and I aren't from Rainbow Falls either. We're both mail-order brides. Things weren't easy at first, but they do get better." Ursula's heart warmed at their words. "Thank you. That means a lot to hear." With final smiles, nods, and waves, Tiffany and Agnes continued on their way. Ursula's mind was lighter. She watched them for a moment as they receded in the distance, their laughter drifting back on the gentle breeze. She didn't know who those kind women were, but they just lifted her spirits. They were strangers, yet they offered her comfort and wisdom. Maybe they were angels. Smiling to herself, Ursula turned and continued her walk. Minutes later, she finally reached the diner. Her feet ached from the long walk. A large, creaking sign swayed gently in the breeze, proclaiming Mabel's Diner in faded letters. A few horses were tied up outside, their tails swishing in the breeze. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, Ursula caught a whiff of the aromatic scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked bread. The interior was warm and inviting, with a long counter running along one side, behind which a grizzled old man wiped down glasses. The diner's few patrons sat at small, round tables, each covered with checkered cloths. The chatter was low, punctuated by the occasional clink of cutlery against plates. A burly woman in an apron appeared from a curtain leading somewhere else in the diner, bearing a tray with steaming bowls. Ursula spotted Amelia at a corner table, and she beamed. She hurried over, ignoring the curious stares of the other patrons. She was used to it. It wasn't uncommon for them to attract attention. Twins were rare, and their identical appearances always drew curious gazes. "I'm so glad you came." Ursula slid into the chair opposite her sister. She reached across the table and squeezed her hands. "It's so good to see you. I came over as soon as I got your letter." "I couldn't come to meet you. Ethan might not be pleased to see me," Amelia said, her gaze falling. "Things have gotten worse between our husbands." Ursula drew a sharp breath. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "I understand why now. 2 nights ago, Ethan and I nearly got into an argument about your suggestion. Later, he came to my room to apologize. He told me about how Thomas's father cheated his father when he was still young. They never reconciled. Now Thomas is trying to do the same thing." Amelia frowned. "Thomas said something different." Ursula drew back, raising a brow. "What did he say?" "Thomas did mention something about Jesse, his father," Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said Jesse tried to make amends with Ethan's father, Ben." Ursula's eyes widened. Was Thomas lying to her, or did Ethan lie? She forced the thought out. Ethan didn't lie, and she knew it. Make amends? Ethan never mentioned anything like that. He's always painted Jesse as the villain. Amelia nodded. "That's what Thomas said. Maybe there's something Ethan doesn't know or doesn't want to accept. If Ethan knew, then that would mean he was wrong to keep a grudge. But the hurt in his eyes 2 nights ago was undeniable. Something wasn't right." Amelia continued her speech. "I don't think Thomas is lying. If Jesse really did try to make amends, there might be evidence of it somewhere. Maybe letters or documents. Maybe Ben or Jesse had a diary." Ursula frowned, staring into space. There was one place she could check. Her skin shuddered at the thought of finding out that all the animosity threatening to split them apart was based on a lie. She turned to her sister. "You're right. I'll look around the house. There might be something that could change Ethan's mind." "I'll do the same." The sisters sat in silence for a moment, staring at the tabletop. The burly waiter came by their table, and the sisters ordered a simple meal of cornbread. When she left, Amelia released a long, shuddering breath. "We'll end this. I know we will," she said, breaking the silence. Ursula nodded, squaring her shoulders. "You're right. They had to." At that moment, their cornbread arrived. They ate quickly. Once they were done, they paid and left the diner. In the distance, streaks of gold and fiery orange spilled across the sky. Darkness was beckoning. "Let's go separate ways. We don't want to draw more attention than we already have." Ursula nodded at Amelia's suggestion. She pulled her sister into a tight hug. "Take care, Amelia," Ursula whispered. "You too, Ursula. Stay safe," Amelia replied, her voice thick. They parted ways, each walking in opposite directions. Ursula hurried back home, her mind set. She would set things down, no matter what it took. She loved Ethan. Her chest fluttered, and she inhaled deeply. She couldn't bear to see him suffer because of the past. Ethan had left for the day. Ursula glanced around. The house was quiet. Perfect. She didn't want to be distracted as she searched for evidence of Thomas's claim. Standing outside Ethan's study, she stopped. Her hand froze on the handle. She'd never been into his study before, nor had she seen him enter. He was always busy in the fields, and she guessed he never used it. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The compelling urge to search for the truth conflicted with the sinking feeling in her belly. Ethan wouldn't be pleased to find her nosing around, but she didn't have a choice. She needed to do this. Pushing open the heavy door of the study, she stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, as closed curtains shielded the early rays of the rising sun. Her nose twitched as she moved to open the curtains. Dust danced in the air, and the faint, musty smell of old books and papers lingered around. The study was cluttered with stacks of papers, a large oak desk, and shelves lined with books. Ursula nodded to herself. It was time. She started by sifting through the papers on the desk, but found nothing of significance. Moving to the shelves, she carefully pulled out books and notebooks, flipping through them. As she worked, her eyes swung around the room. There was nothing of note. But then she spotted it. Her eyes narrowed. There was an old wooden box tucked away in a corner, almost hidden beneath a pile of dusty books. Her brows creased as she pulled the box out and set it on the desk. She blew on it, and more dust flew into the air. It was worn and battered, and the wood splintered in places. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Her eyes widened when she opened the lid. These items belonged to Ben Garrett. There were old photographs, a pocket watch, and several letters tied together with a piece of twine. Her heart pounded as she untied the bundle and began to read through them. Most of the letters were mundane, dealing with everyday matters. Some were from family members, consoling him over the loss of his wife. But one letter, yellowed with age and addressed to Ben, caught her eye. The handwriting was elegant. As she read, her breath caught in her throat. The letter was from Jessie Pearson. Dear Ben, I know we have had our differences, and I'm sorry about the actions that drove a wedge between us. Mr. Hendricks decided he would be better off working with one partner to save costs on his end. He told me you agreed to it, and he settled you. I didn't know otherwise, and I agreed to supply the wool and hide. When I found out, I'd already sent the supplies. I couldn't refuse the payment. I'm a coward. I know that. It was never my intention to betray you, my old friend. I hope we can find a way to mend this rift for the sake of our families. Your friend, Jessie. Tears welled in Ursula's eyes. This was the proof she had been searching for. Jessie had indeed extended an olive branch. Didn't Ben read it? Why had Ethan never mentioned this? Why was he so determined to hold on to his hate? She sat back in the chair, holding the letter tightly. Ethan's refusal to acknowledge that Jessie tried to make peace with his father puzzled her. Was his hatred so deeply rooted that he couldn't see the truth? Or was there something else driving his animosity? As she pondered these questions, a persistent ache gnawed at her chest. Ethan's stubbornness and refusal to let go of the past were not just hurting him, but were also preventing their families from finding peace. It had to stop. Tears stung at her eyes. Wiping them away, she carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the box. Then she resumed searching the box. What else would she find? Chapter 10. Ethan's day had begun like any other, overseeing the work on the ranch and making sure everything ran smoothly. His mind, however, was preoccupied with the events of the past week. The tension between him and Ursula had eased somewhat since their conversation about Jessie's letter, but he could still feel an undercurrent of unresolved conflict. He tried to ignore it. He had business. The logs have been delivered, as agreed. It was a pleasure doing business with you. Pleasure's all mine, Ethan said, shaking Sherman Whitfield's hand. The two men stood in the field, with the sun already high in the sky. They watched as Wyatt led a group of ranch hands in rounding up a scattered herd of cattle. The men, mounted on sturdy, sure-footed horses, rode whistling and calling out to the cattle. Some were swinging lassos. Dust rose in clouds around them, shimmering in the sunlight. In the distance, a few ranch hands were hauling logs of wood to a cleared site. Ethan grinned. In a few months, he would have a bunkhouse for ranch hands who opted to live on his ranch for little pay. Things were coming along well. Sherman turned to Ethan, eyes wide. You've got a lot happening on your ranch. I can't believe it was all overgrown fields and ruins months ago. I'm just doing what I can, Ethan said, shrugging and trying his best to remain straight-faced. Give yourself some credit. It takes some years to do what you've done in less than one. Ethan chuckled. Thanks. Sherman glanced at his pocket watch. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his dark, unruly hair. Then he put his hat back on. Well, I should be going. Business can't wait. If you need more lumber, you know where to find me. You're hard to miss. Ethan tipped his hat at Sherman, who did the same before heading to a carriage. He turned to the field, beaming. Things were going well. His smile faded as his gaze traveled to a small herd by the water troughs. The only problem was the stream. He hadn't seen Thomas since the day at the stream, and his mind whirled with suspicion. Was Thomas planning something? Something caught the corner of his eye, and he squinted. Then his brows furrowed. The familiar figure darted toward the ranch. It was Howard, appearing once again from the direction of Thomas's ranch. This was the third time in a week he had seen Howard come from that direction. It didn't sit right with him. Something was definitely up. Saddling his horse, he straddled the stallion and urged it forward. The horse sprinted through the field and past the herds. He got to Howard just as he vaulted over the fence. The boy's face paled as Ethan jumped down and strode to him. Howard, the boy jumped. Sir? You've got some explaining to do. Howard's throat bobbed. I ain't skipped out on any work. Honest, Mr. Garrett. I've fixed the part of the fence you told me to. Ethan frowned. What are you doing coming from Thomas Pearson's ranch again? Are you spying for him by any chance? Howard's eyes darted and he stammered. No, sir, I ain't spying, I swear. Then what are you doing there? Ethan demanded, hoisting a finger. And don't lie to me, boy. I've seen you going back and forth all week. If you're working for Thomas, you better tell me now. Howard's shoulders slumped and he looked down at his boots. I ain't spying, Mr. Garrett. Honest, I've just been delivering letters. Ethan's frown deepened. Letters? What letters? The boy swallowed so hard that his throat bobbed. The missus and her sister, sir. They've been writing to each other, and I've been getting their letters across. That's all, I swear. Ethan's jaw tightened, his anger flaring. Why has my wife been sending one of my ranch hands to deliver letters behind my back? Just then, he noticed Howard was indeed holding a piece of paper in his trembling hands. He snatched the letter from Howard's trembling hand. What's this? Howard took a step back, looking ready to bolt. It's from Mrs. Amelia, sir. I don't know what it says. Ethan tore open the letter and scanned its contents. His eyes narrowed as he read. Ursula, I overheard Thomas talking to a lawyer, Samuel Hart, about the stream. Thomas wants the stream at all costs. I hope we resolve things before they get out of hand. Write to me if you found anything. With love, Amelia. Ethan's blood boiled. The very same lawyer he had been consulting, Samuel Hart, was now colluding with Thomas. He crumpled the letter in his fist. You can go, Ethan barked at Howard. The boy didn't need to be told twice. He turned and ran off, disappearing over the fields. Ethan read the letter again, trying to make sense of it. If Amelia was right, then that would mean Thomas was trying to bribe Samuel to work against him. He gritted his teeth. He couldn't let that happen. He muttered under his breath as he tucked the paper in his pocket and straddled his horse. He couldn't believe he had been so naive to trust that lawyer without questioning his loyalty. Turning his horse, Ethan rode back to the ranch. He urged the horse on until it went into a full gallop. With that speed, he got back in no time. As he dismounted and strode into the house, he slammed the door behind him. Ursula was nowhere in sight. He paced the room, the letter still clutched in his hand. Not only was he being done over by Thomas, but also by the very people who were supposed to help him. He needed to get to the bottom of this. And why was Ursula sending letters behind him? What if Amelia and her husband were working together? How much had she told her sister already? He groaned, breathing deeply to keep calm. He needed to talk to her. Why had she kept this from him? Why hadn't she trusted him enough to share what she knew? Even in his home, he wasn't safe. Where was she? He would keep the letter, then find her. He needed an explanation. He took long, angry strides toward his study. As he pushed open the door to his study, the sight of Ursula standing beside his father's old desk greeted him. Her eyes were wide, and she was frozen, holding some old letters. His heart pounded against his chest. What are you doing in here? I was searching for something. What's wrong? You look. Why didn't you tell me about your letters to Amelia? He asked, holding up the crumpled letter. Ursula's eyes widened in surprise. Ethan, he cut her off, his voice harsh. You've been sending Howard to deliver letters to your sister without telling me. And now I find out that Thomas is trying to bribe Samuel Hart to lose the case. Why didn't you tell me, Ursula? Ursula squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze without flinching. Her hardened gaze made him flinch. I didn't tell you because I knew you wouldn't listen. You're so consumed by your hatred for Thomas and his family that you can't see anything else. You see forgiveness as a weakness, Ethan, but it's not. Holding on to this anger is what makes you weak. Her words stung. Thomas is not my family, Ursula. His father betrayed my father and left him to rot. And you know the truth about what his family did, yet you're still not on my side. How can you stand there and defend them? Ursula placed her hands on her hips. Her frown grew deeper, but there was something about her gaze that made him want to back down. How can I be on your side when you don't even tell me the whole truth, Ethan? You've kept a side of the story that could have changed everything from me. Ethan frowned. Was there something she knew and he didn't? What are you talking about? She picked up a piece of paper from the desk and handed it to him. He hesitated. It's a letter of apology from Jesse. He explained what happened. It was all a misunderstanding. You never told me you found it. You never told me about any attempt Jesse made to fix things. How can I understand if you don't share these things with me?" Ethan took the letter from her hands. As he read, his anger drained away, replaced by a heavy, numbing shock. His eyes shot open, and his hands began to tremble. He sank into a nearby chair, the letter slipping from his fingers. Jesse apologized to his father. But why didn't he notice the letter? It was then that it came to him. He covered his face with his hands. I've never seen this letter," he said, his voice shaking. "I remember a letter coming from my father from Jesse, but I didn't read it because I was having a bad day. I couldn't care less what Jesse had to say, so I decided to read it later. Only minutes later, I got news of my father's death. I was so consumed by grief and anger that I never thought to look at it." Ursula moved closer, touching his shoulder. When he looked at her, his eyes were wet with tears. Her gaze has softened. "This letter could have changed everything. Jesse tried to make amends. He extended an olive branch. And your father, he never had the chance to respond. I'm sorry that happened, but you can change that. Don't let the hate consume you." Ethan's shoulders slumped. "All this time, I thought they were the enemy, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe I've been wrong about everything." Ursula kneeled beside him, taking his hands in hers. "It's not too late. We can still put this to rest. We can find a way to move forward, but we have to do it together." He looked at her, trying to blink away the tears. "What do I do, Ursula? How do I even begin to make things right?" She smiled, calming him. "We start by letting go of the past, by forgiving. It won't be easy, but it's the only way we can build a future together. You have to be willing to forgive Thomas and his father. He wanted to make amends with your father." Ethan took a deep breath before nodding. "You're right. It's time for forgiveness. I'll talk to Thomas." Ursula squeezed his hands. "We'll do it together. I believe you can. You're strong enough to." Ethan stood, lifting Ursula with him. He pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her close as the tears fell from his eyes. "Thank you, Ursula, for everything. I would have been lost without you." She hugged him back, stroking his hair. They stayed like that for a long moment, and Ethan's heart calmed. When he regained enough of his composure, he pulled back. "I need to talk to Thomas. We need to settle this." Ursula nodded and smiled, holding his face. "I'll be right there with you." Holding hands, they walked out of the house and into the bright day. Chapter 11. Thank you for everything. Ethan's words lingered in Ursula's mind. Her heart swelled as they rode toward the Pearson ranch. It was the first time she was riding a horse, yet she felt safe clutching and holding on to him. All she could think of was the impending meeting. The ride was a short one. The Pearson ranch was just down the stream, a few minutes from Garrett's ranch on horseback. When they reached, Ursula's eyes widened. Thomas's ranch was just as big as Ethan's, stretching far across the horizon. A picket fence that was painted a pristine white enclosed the yard. At the gate stood two cowboys. One was telling a story with animated hand movement, while the other, leaning against the gate, chuckled and laughed as he listened. They turned when Ursula and Ethan approached, straightening as their eyes widened. The first one ran over. "Mr. Garrett? Mrs.?" He cleared his throat. What do you want?" "We're here to speak to Thomas. We'd appreciate it if you took us to him." The ranch hand nodded. "Sure, right this way." A gravel path led from the gate to the front steps, crunching softly underfoot. Minutes later, they were standing in front of a two-story structure, almost like Ethan's. Ursula took in the sight as they waited. The wide porch of the whitewashed structure stretched across the front, shaded by a broad overhang supported by thick, decorative posts. A rocking chair swayed gently in the breeze. Her eyes drew to the chimney on the roof, and she imagined the smoke curling from that chimney on cooler nights. A longing smile played on her lips. She'd always wanted a home with a chimney as a kid when she had to endure cold nights with her sister and mother. An unchecked tear escaped her eye. "Are you okay?" Ethan's question brought her to the present. She turned to him, smiling. "I am." His hold on her hand tightened, and the simple touch warmed her. Clinging to his arm, she leaned against his shoulders. New York was a lifetime ago. This was her life now. Off to the side of the house, she noticed a large, red-painted barn and several other buildings, some of which looked similar to the ranch house. She didn't need any more indicators that Thomas was wealthy, but her sister loved simple things. Was Amelia happy among all these? She didn't have time to explore that thought as the oak front door swung open and Thomas appeared. Amelia followed behind him, waiting on the porch. Her gaze flickered. A deep frown shaded Thomas's face. His eyes narrowed as he laid eyes on them. He walked over, clenching his fists. "What are you doing here?" Thomas's tone was clipped and cold. Ethan's grip on Ursula's hand tightened briefly before he let go, stepping forward. "I'm here to talk." "Haven't we talked enough already?" "I'm not here to fight about the stream. We need to talk about our fathers, Thomas. We need to end this." For a moment, silence stretched between the two men. Thomas raised a brow. "What about our fathers do you want to talk about?" Ethan sighed. "I saw Jesse's letter." Thomas stared blankly at him for a while. Then he nodded and gestured for Ethan to follow him. Ethan turned to Ursula, flashing her a warm smile. "Wait with your sister. This might take a while." Ursula returned his smile. The two men moved to a side of the yard near the fence. Their conversation began in low, tense tones. Drawing a deep breath, Ursula turned and went to Amelia. The two sisters hugged, and Amelia's presence was like a comforting balm to Ursula's frayed nerves. They sat, watching as Ethan and Thomas talked. Amelia's hand slipped into Ursula's, and their fingers intertwined. "Do you think they'll work things out?" Amelia's voice trembled. Ursula squeezed her sister's hand, even though her nerves were taut beneath her composed exterior. "I hope so, for all our sakes." Amelia stared at their hands. "I want to be hopeful, but so much is happening. I feel like it's all slipping from my hands." Ursula's heart ached for her sister. "You're getting married soon, aren't you? Your relationship should be something to hold on to at least." Amelia tried to respond, but her voice wavered. Tears made her eyes glimmer. "I don't even know if we'll get married, Ursula. I don't think Thomas loves me, at least not like Ethan loves you." Ursula reached out, brushing a stray tear from her sister's cheek. She drew Amelia close. "Love isn't always easy to see, especially when there's so much pain and anger. But I see the way Thomas looks at you. There's something there. Just give it time." Amelia's eyes searched Ursula's. "I hope you're right. I want to believe that. Between his large family and the troubles with the stream, it's hard, but I'll try to believe it. Please try. Don't give up, and put a smile on that face. You deserve to be happy." Amelia smiled, wiping tears from her eyes. "We both do." Ursula turned to Ethan and Thomas. Right then, Thomas was doing the talking. They seemed calm, although their voices rose at random intervals. Ursula held her breath. "Do you think they can resolve their feud?" Amelia asked. Ursula didn't answer. She was asking herself the same question. After what seemed like an eternity, the men turned and walked back toward the house. Ursula searched her husband's face. His expression was almost unreadable. She held her breath. His eyes met hers, and that familiar warmth was present. "We talked things out," Ethan said. "We've decided to share the stream." Thomas nodded. A smile broke across his face. "Just to be clear, I didn't plan to bribe Samuel. I wanted to hire him because I didn't know Ethan had already gone to him. It didn't matter because he turned me down." Ursula breathed a sigh. Amelia's grip on her hand tightened, and a smile brightened her face. "Maybe things can get better. Maybe we can finally have some peace." "We can," Thomas said, fixing his gaze on Ursula. Closing her eyes, Ursula uttered a silent prayer of thanksgiving. Ethan cleared his throat. "Thank you, Ursula. Amelia, without you two, we wouldn't have gotten over the past. A lot has happened, but we can take comfort in the fact that we're all here. One big family." "I couldn't have seen this coming," Thomas said, chuckling. Ethan grinned. "Me neither." Ursula rose to her feet, and Amelia followed suit. The men exchanged a few more words about the stream. As they said their goodbyes and prepared to leave, Ursula felt a lightness in her heart she hadn't known in years. "You both have to come by for dinner sometime," Ethan said as they were ready to leave. "We'd be happy to have you." This time, it was Amelia who answered. "We'll come, thank you." Ursula waved at Amelia, who waved back. Ethan held her hand, and her fingers intertwined. She turned to him. "Let's go home." Home. Her heart fluttered. She loved the sound of that. The journey back to the ranch was a quiet one. As the horse trotted along the path leading to the ranch, Ursula couldn't stop smiling. Her arms were wrapped around Ethan's waist, and her cheek rested against his broad back. The rhythmic motion of the horse beneath them and the gentle sway of the saddle soothed her, and she leaned closer. She breathed in, savoring the faint, earthy scent of her husband. Even the landscape around them was perfect. The rolling hills stretched into the distance, dotted with trees and grazing cattle that seemed almost golden in the twilight. Tall grasses swayed in the evening breeze as the sun slowly dipped below the horizon. Ursula tightened her hold on Ethan, relishing the solid warmth of his body against hers. She marveled at the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt as he guided their horse with a steady hand. "This is perfect. Don't you think so, Ethan?" He glanced back over his shoulder, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "It is, isn't it?" The low rumble of his voice sent a shiver of warmth through her. As they approached the ranch, the familiar silhouette of their home came into view, nestled snugly against the backdrop of the darkening sky. The lights from the windows glowed. Isa had lit the lamps. The sight filled Ursula with a sense of peace. They rode up to the front of the house and dismounted. Ethan helped her down, and his firm yet gentle hands lingered at her waist for a moment longer. Ursula shivered at his touch, and warmth spread through her skin. Hand in hand, they walked towards the house. Ursula stole a glance at Ethan, noting the way the evening light softened his features. There was a tenderness in his eyes that she had come to know well. When they reached the steps on the porch, Ethan stopped. Ursula turned. Was there something on his mind? "Thank you for opening my eyes, Ursula. I mean every word. For so long, I held on to anger and hate. You made me move on. You made me forgive, even when I didn't know I was strong enough to." Ursula's eyes glistened with tears. She stepped closer to him, touching his face. "I'm glad you see that, Ethan. I love you, and I want us to have a future free from the past." He took a deep breath, his eyes locking on hers. "I love you, Ursula. I want to be with you." Her eyes widened as tears escaped her eyelids. "Do you mean?" "Yes. I want us to move into a room together permanently. No more separate rooms." Her smile widened. She sniffed, wiped her eyes, and looked up once more at him. "I'd love that, and I have a request too. Can you try to get home earlier? I understand the demands of the ranch, but I'd like to spend more time with you." Ethan chuckled. "I can promise you that. I've realized that I don't need to be suspicious of my men anymore, including Howard. He's a good young man. I can trust him, and that means I can be home with you." Ursula's heart fluttered at his words. She stepped even closer until his solid chest was against her own. Their proximity sent a shiver down her spine, and she tilted her head up to meet his gaze. Ethan cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "I love you." Her pulse quickened and her breath hitched in her throat. "I love you too." His face drew closer. She leaned in and her lips met his. Ethan responded, deepening the kiss. His hands slid to the back of her neck, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. Ursula's hands rested on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingertips. It throbbed in rhythm with hers. Everything else faded away. The kiss was tender and slow, filled with a sweetness that resonated with Ursula to her core. Her fingers threaded through his hair, her body melting against his. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Their foreheads rested against each other. The cool and crisp night air blew against her heated skin. In the distance, the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle cut through the deepening silence. Ethan's eyes were soft, filled with a tenderness that took Ursula's breath away. "Let's go inside. We have a lot to look forward to." Ursula nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "Yes, we do." With one last lingering kiss, they turned and walked hand in hand into their home. Prosody. Epilogue. I have to say, you outdid yourselves. The spread is perfect. Ethan couldn't agree more with Thomas's words. He glanced around. The dining room was bathed in the warm glow of oil lamps and candles. The long wooden table, draped with a white tablecloth, was laden with an array of dishes that filled the air with delicious aromas. Roasted meats, freshly baked bread, mashed potatoes with rich gravy, and an assortment of vegetables, all prepared with love by Isa, who bustled about with a satisfied smile. "Dig in, everyone," she said, grinning as she placed a tray of roasted chicken on the table. "Don't let me hold you back." Ethan grinned. He couldn't believe an ordinary dinner with family could closely resemble a hearty Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner. Sitting at the head of the table, he nodded with contentment. This was the first dinner the Pearsons and Garretts would have together in decades, and it already seemed perfect. To Ethan's right, Ursula was seated with a glow on her cheeks as she engaged in a light conversation with her sister. On his left, Thomas and Amelia were seated. The room was filled with the pleasant hum of voices, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of cutlery. As the meal progressed, the atmosphere grew even warmer. Ethan turned to Thomas, clearing his throat after swallowing another morsel of gravy. "How's the water diversion coming along on your end?" Thomas chuckled. "It would have been perfect if my men could only pick up the pace. I've managed to fill the troughs on the north end of the field, but it's been hard trying to guide the water flow to the south. Between that and keeping the herding going before winter sets in, it's been hectic." "How are you running things so smoothly here?" Ethan shrugged. With Wyatt's guidance, things had been seamless. "My foreman has come up with a lot of ideas to make things easier." "You reckon I could get some of those ideas?" "Sure," Ethan grinned. "You could talk to him tomorrow." "Much obliged. That sounds great. I could use some advice from an expert." "What about your fencing?" "The new fencing is holding up well," Thomas said, cutting into his steak. "Thank God I had the sense to fence the areas around the troughs. I reckon we'll have a much easier time managing the cattle now." Ethan nodded, a smile playing on his lips. He raised his glass. "Here's to a prosperous future for both our ranches." Everyone echoed the sentiment, lifting their glasses in a toast. Ursula leaned forward, her eyes twinkling. "You two have been going on and on. Speaking of the future, have you two set a date for the wedding yet?" She faced Thomas, who had been more evasive on the topic lately. He chuckled and glanced at Amelia, who colored. "We're working on it, don't worry. You'll be the first to know once we've settled on a date." "You better get a move on, Thomas. Amelia's a patient woman, but even she has her limits." Ursula laughed. "You hear that? No more dragging your feet. My sister can't wait for the wedding of her dreams." Thomas took it all in stride, smiling warmly. "I promise, it won't be much longer. I just want everything to be perfect for our big day." Before long, the main course gave way to dessert, a decadent apple pie with a dollop of freshly whipped cream. As Isa placed the pie on the table and cut it to size, Ursula sat up. She looked at him, and he smiled, nodding. It was time to make the announcement. Ursula cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. "There's some wonderful news I want to share with everyone." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. As he looked at her radiant face, his heart swelled with love. He reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Go on, darling." Ursula took a deep breath, her eyes shining. "We're going to have a baby." For a moment, there was stunned silence around the table. A chorus of joyful exclamations erupted. Amelia sprang from her seat, rushing to embrace her sister. "Oh, Ursula, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you both." Thomas clapped Ethan on the back, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Congratulations, Ethan. That's fantastic news." Isa, who had been hovering nearby with a fresh pot of coffee, let out a delighted whoop. "Bless my soul. A little one is on the way. This calls for a celebration." All the while, Ethan remained silent. His lips were parted, and his eyes were fixed on Ursula. Her gaze met his, and her face glowed. A wide grin spread across his lips. He stood, pulling her gently into his arms. When he spoke, his voice was low and soft. "We're going to be parents. I still can't believe it." Ursula looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Yes, we're going to be a family." Without hesitating, he drew her close. It didn't matter that others were present. He kissed her, a deep, tender kiss he hoped would convey all the love and gratitude he felt. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," Ursula giggled, tears falling from her eyes. "I love you too." "I say we make another toast to that," Thomas said, chuckling. And they did just that. Toast to love and family. Later, as the evening drew to a close, Ethan found himself standing on the porch with Thomas. The night was cool, and the sky was a deep, star-studded velvet. They stood in companionable silence for a moment. "Thank you for coming tonight," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. "It means a lot to Ursula and me. It means a lot to us, too. We've got a lot of history to get over, but I think we're on the right path." Ethan's gaze traveled from Thomas and Amelia to Ursula. He squeezed her hand, which was in his. "We are. And it's not just for us, it's for our families." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. "You're going to be a great father, Ethan. I can't wait to be godfather to your children." Ethan chuckled. He shook hands with Thomas. "Take care." Thomas nodded. He and Amelia walked to a waiting wagon, holding hands. Ethan wrapped his arm around Ursula, and they headed back inside. The house had fallen into silence. Ethan closed the door behind their guests and turned to Ursula. Her eyes glimmered, and a warm smile played on her lips. "Ready for bed?" Ursula nodded. "It's been a wonderful night." Together they made their way up the stairs to their bedroom. The room was serene, with the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the curtains and casting gentle shadows on the walls. After changing into lighter clothes, Ethan helped Ursula into bed and slid in beside her. The warmth of the room and the softness of the bedclothes created a cocoon of comfort. Ethan faced Ursula. He reached out and gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "You know, darling, tonight was one of the best nights of my life." "Mine too. I'm so happy that things are finally starting to come together." Ethan smiled. He leaned in, planting a soft kiss on her forehead. "Thank you for making me the happiest man in the world," he whispered against her skin. "And thank you for loving me." Ethan pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her and holding her tightly. They lay like that for a while, and he listened to the steady rhythm of her breathing. As he began to drift off to sleep, Ursula nestled her head against his chest. His lips curled as he succumbed to the gentle pull of sleep. And as they slept, they held on to each other. Their bond had never been stronger.